Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Black Panthers, Portraits from an Unfinished Revolution, edited by Brian Shih and Yohuro Williams. This is from Chapter 1, In Defense of Self-Defense, Pathways to the Black Panther Party. People joined the Black Panther Party for many different reasons. The moment of politicization was different for everyone, but a few were commonly shared, including the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and the 1965 Watts Urban Rebellion. A more general sense of frustration and alienation compelled others to join the Panthers' ranks. The party exerted an enormous pull on the imagination of the members, especially those who had experienced police brutality. In the rebellious spirit of the times, the party's bold stance on self-defense resonated with those seeking fresh alternatives for achieving social justice and black liberation. Party members expressed a deep appreciation for other aspects of the Panthers program, including its community service programs, which grew out of a genuine love for the people. My neighborhood friend, a sister that I've known since I was about 11 years old, said, "Claudia, I want you to go with me. We're going to go and hear these Panthers speak at PS 92, which was an elementary school in our community." I said, "Okay, I'll go, I'm down." I listened to these brothers speak and I heard the pitch. I saw the determination and I saw the compassion. I thought, wow, this is the feeling that I used to get when I went into clubs and popped my fingers and got on the dance floor. It was the same feeling, except it was bigger for me now. It was bigger than me. It was full of love of the people. No longer did we have to argue and fight about, what are you looking at me like that for? Or don't step on my sneaker, or this is my block. Now we really had something to fight for. We had a people to fight for. This is bigger than any gang or club. We had a goal. We had something to look forward to, which was the betterment of black people. It was most definitely something that I was searching for, but I didn't yet know what that I was searching. I didn't find it. It fell on me. That was the first meeting. That's what actually started the wheels in my mind for me to become political. I was rank and file. I did a lot of things. The easiest way to say it is just to imagine worker bees. You got one queen, everyone else works. Rank and file. Those were the worker bees. We did it all. The one thing I enjoyed the most was teaching the political education classes on 7th Avenue in front of the Harlem office. That was the most fruitful. But anything I did, it was for the love of the people. Wherever I was sent, or whatever I had to do, it didn't matter anymore because it was for the love of the people. We were trying to get the word out. If I had to sell 125 papers in a day and I got close to that goal, then I did a good job. I was originally from Queens and came out of the Corona branch of the Black Panther Party. When the Panther 21 were arrested and went to jail, in order to keep those offices open and functioning, Panthers were sent all over the city to Harlem. I was one of the Panthers that ended up in the Harlem branch. That's how I got to be there on Wednesday nights to give the PE classes, the political education classes. I was extremely nervous the first time, but once I found my voice, then it went like clockwork. A lot of the people in the community who were just walking by were like, well, let me stop and see what this little girl is talking about, because I was indeed a little girl at that time. We started off every PE class with a 10-point program, and we ended every PE class with, okay, let me hear from you guys. What do you want to see different in your community? And how are you living? Then we would get the feedback, and then we would know how to concentrate our efforts. Rent strikes were crazy, because if you had to live like that, why should you pay rent? We did clothing drives. We did food drives. We did, of course, the breakfast program. There were a lot of other things that happened, and they might have been more meaningful, but those PE classes stayed with me. We were outside on the street in front of the office. When you were giving a class or you were having a talk inside the office and there were only Panthers around you, the feeling was just different than outside on the street. The Panthers knew what you were doing because they were Panthers and they were doing the same thing. Outside, there were constant questions and answers with the people. You had to give yourself up when you were outside in that crowd. You never knew who was going to say, we don't care about that, we don't care about you, you need to go away. There were a lot of people that just did not know where we were coming from and were afraid that if they were seen in the office or if they were seen asking questions, that they'd get reprisals, that they'd end up getting hurt. They were afraid. Things went so fast. Time seems to accelerate when you're always looking over your shoulder. At this time, it was all-out war against the Panthers, and brothers are being shot down in the street or set up or going to jail for years. We have brothers in jail since that time, 40, 41 years. We've had brothers that we've lost on the inside that we can't let the world forget. The government said, okay, we're going to lock them up and throw away the key and no one will ever care. But it's not true. We want them out. We want freedom for all political prisoners. We don't want any more of them to die on the inside. That's the biggest injustice. There were times when our cadre consisted of almost nothing but women, and that was when the brothers were locked up or had to go underground. I remember being on a front line against a policeman on horseback and being 6 months pregnant. What we wanted was a simple street light, and we got the community out there and we blocked traffic. I didn't know whether I was going to be trampled, my baby killed, but I knew I had to be there. I was an active member of the party from 1968 to 1971.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I am rarely speechless. It's a useful trait on these days when I'm invited to sit in this chair while Thom is away. I can often find words, sometimes the right ones. Sometimes the right words I find were written by someone else. Last night while preparing, I reflected on the day's discussion. It occurred to me that we had a more diverse array of callers than we sometimes do. Or maybe I just noticed better. I said, thank you, Lord. And not because, I hate white people, but because I know that a pro-democracy movement, that a we the people movement, must neither be monochromatic nor falsely colorblind. And that those of us who cheer and hope for democracy must include in our chorus and often have that chorus led by people for whom America's traditions and stabs at democracy have offered too few favors and committed too few sins, or too many sins, excuse me. For real democracy cannot be rooted merely in privilege. But still, when I plead for democracy, critical allies can rightly say, what has democracy ever done for me? And how can we even claim to know it? Much less claim to practice it. I thought on this. And on thinking on the right words to find, I found a brilliant word finder who once again found better words than I. And it was Langston Hughes. Let America be America again. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free. But America has never been America to me. Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be the great, strong land of love where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme, that anyone can be crushed by one above. It never was America to me. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe. But there never has been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free. Say, who are you that mumbles in the dark? And who are you that draws your veil across the stars? I am the poor white, fooled and pushed apart. I am the black man bearing slavery's scars. I am the red man driven from the land. I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak. I am the young person full of strength and hope, tangled in that ancient endless chain of profit, power, gain, and grab the land, of grab the gold, of grab the ways of satisfying need, of work the men, of take the pay, of owning everything for one's own greed. I am the farmer, bondsman to the soul. I am the worker, sold to the machine. I am the black man, servant to you all. I am the people, humble, hungry, mean. Hungry yet today, despite the dream. Beaten yet today, O pioneers. I am the one who never got ahead. The poorest worker, bartered through the years. I am the one who dreamt our most basic dream. In the old world, while still a serf of kings, who dreamt a dream so strong, so brave, so true, that even yet its mighty daring sings. In every brick and stone, and every furrow turned, that's made America the land it has become. Oh, I'm the one who sailed these early seas in search of what I meant to be my home. For I'm the one who left dark Ireland's shore, and Poland's plain, and England's grassy lea. And torn from black Africa's strand I came to build a homeland of the free. The free? Who said the free? Not me. Surely not me. The millions on relief today, the millions shot when we strike, the millions who have nothing for our pay, for all the dreams we've dreamed, and all the songs we've sung, and all the hopes we've held, and all the flags we've hung, the millions who have nothing for our pay except the dream that's almost dead today. Oh, let America be America again. The land that never has been yet, and yet must be. The land where everyone is free. The land that's mine. The poor man's, the native man's, the black man's, me. Who made America. Whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must bring back our mighty dream again. Sure, call me any ugly name you choose. The steel of freedom does not stain. For those who live like leeches on the people's lives, we must take back our land again, America. Yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me. And yet I swear this oath, America will be. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the plunder and rot and graft and stealth and lies, we the people must redeem. The land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains and the endless plain. All the stretch of these great green states, and make America again. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff Smith. I'm sitting in. Thank goodness you're with us. Thank goodness for this program and this community. Call in line today is 202-808-9925. I'm grateful for the show. Langston Hughes says it better than I could. Here's a topic. There'll be a few. We're going to talk about the digital divide today. We're going to talk about the abortion abolitionists. We're going to talk with the Women's Law Center about what is happening with the fight on abortion. We're going to talk to Malia Lazou about what does it mean to be an American today. It is August. It is Black Business Month. I also want to talk about this before the break, which is, I think, among the most important pieces of news that have happened in weeks. And its results did not happen in weeks. And very often, stories like this get missed a little bit because they're lagging indicators, or actually they're leading indicators. Their real impacts will be seen or not seen and barely noticed for years and years and years. But you may have seen that yesterday it was reported, first by the New York Times, then by ProPublica and others, that the largest political advocacy donation in history was made. It was $1.6 billion. It was by an industrialist in Chicago, Bar Seed, it might be Said, I don't know how it's pronounced for sure, to Leonard Leo. Leonard Leo, co-head of the Federal Society, who has shepherded the right-wing Supreme Court justice appointments in the Trump administration and before. That Leonard Leo will now have $1.6 billion, and that's if nobody else pitches in, to have one of the brand new secret. It wasn't, they organized the trust, they organized the gift as a trust, so it hadn't appeared for the last 2 years. It took investigative journalism to find it. $1.6 billion. To be clear, a state-based advocacy nonprofit, most states will, have a budget of $500,000 to $1 million and be able to underpay people and hope to do a decent job. If you have $1.6 billion, you can do that 3,000 times. We'll be back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. What do we think about that? We're here for democracy. It's still hot democracy summer.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. What are you doing for Hot Democracy Summer? 202-808-9925. We're going to jump straight to a call. We've got Omar. Omar from Herndon, Virginia. Good to hear from you, Omar.
Jefferson the Great, how are you, sir?
I'm well, man. It's nice to hear your voice.
Good. I'm just glad that you're able to pick up right where Tom left off, and I think we're going to have Tom in the morning, and you need to start your own show in the afternoon. All right? Mike, I just have two questions. The first one, can we trust the polls? If you look at the polls, they're all projecting that we're going to sweep the House, the Senate, and we might keep the White House. Can we trust the polls?
No.
Because after 2016 and Nate Silver, I'm still not very sure.
No, we can't. No, we can't. And I'm not trying to bash math. I'm not trying to even bash polls, but it is really hard to project into the future what will happen, right? There's a moment in time, and in a moment in time, it's a sample, and samples are more challenging now, right? Like internet polls suggest that their accuracy is good. But we know that with traditional telephone polls, now fewer people have landlines. And the number of people who answer their phones, who don't screen their calls, is reduced, and therefore that can skew the sample. And there are polling firms that are really working to address that. So I'm not saying, I'm not an anti-polling fundamentalist and say, oh, you can never trust any poll, they'll always be wrong. I think the poll tells us something. It tells us something, but I heard your question to be, can we trust them? The only thing we can trust is if we show up and vote. The only thing we can trust is if we activate. The only thing we trust is if we work to engage and motivate our friends and persuade those who are persuadable, who we donate if we have the means and have the urge to do it, if we knock on doors, if we can do that and have the wherewithal to do it. That's the only thing we can trust, is what each of us can do. Polls can be both a self-fulfilling and a self-defeating prophecy. They can tell you, oh, look, it's going to be fine, therefore I don't need to do something. Or, oh no, it's going to be terrible, and therefore I don't need to do anything. The only lesson from either of those should be the flip side. Whether poll is good or poll is bad, we better do something. Yeah. That's the only thing we can trust in my mind.
I never trusted the polls because they always tend to, people use that as an excuse. Okay, Hillary's going to win anyway, so I'm not going to come out and vote. Oh, people predicting that she's going to win, so I don't need to do any extra things, go out and vote. So I'm not a big fan of the poll. But the last question is, what does the American, you seem to have a very, very different perspective on life and the American ways and things like that. My question to you, is the American dream still alive, and what does it mean? Can you define the American dream? And I'll take your answer off the phone. Thank you.
Oh, Omar. The very moment you said that, Sean said, I have 1 minute. to be able to answer in now remaining 52 seconds to give my impressions of the American dream. I think the American dream, since its inception, has been both false marketing and critical aspirational truth. I think it's been both things. I think it's been both hogwash, and not just hogwash for some, just, have elements of hogwash and a critical idea. And the reason I quoted Langston Hughes is that even if it was hogwash, it could be something we work towards. And it seems something worth working towards. For me, the American dream is not merely something rooted in economic extraction. To me, it's something rooted in overthrowing the idea of inherited, unjustified, unconsented to power wielded by a king and his offspring, and the democracy from whence that has to be rooted. We'll be right back. This is Tom's Show. I'm Jeff. It's your show.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So how do you know which party has the most crooks in it? The Republicans are always saying, oh, those Democrats are soft on crime and, a lot of murders in Democrat-run cities. Well, for the record, first off, red states and red counties have a higher per capita murder rates than do blue states and blue counties. This is just a fact. But secondly, let's look at some of the administrations. I mean, the Obama administration had no criminal indictments. The Jimmy Carter administration had 1. The Bill Clinton administration had 2. But what about the Republican administrations? It was 16 for George W. Bush. It was 26 criminal indictments for Ronald Reagan. Richard Nixon's administration had 76 criminal indictments. And of course, the full-time professional rapist and grifter, Donald Trump, he had 215 criminal indictments. So who's really soft on crime? We got a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out.
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. The word millionaire was apparently coined in French in 1719. I think not in France, though, but I think it was coined in French, spelled slightly differently, to describe speculators in the Mississippi bubble who earned millions in weeks before that bubble burst. The standard French, actually may have been in France, excuse me. The standard French spelling now is now 2 L's, the earliest, and 2 N's. The earliest reference has just a single N. The word millionaire has been with us for a few centuries, couple centuries, about 3 centuries. And for a long time, the word millionaire was a word that had real cultural cachet. The word millionaire, with inflation and, frankly, wealth disparities and growth of sort of wealthy class, it's millionaire isn't what it used to be. Now, a very large number of homeowners in urban areas are millionaires based on the value of their homes. The word billionaire has now become something of a slur and or a compliment. The word billionaire, by the way, is probably a mistake. For a while, Gillian or Jillian, based on giga, for 1,000 million, that's what a billion is, that was the word. Billion is by for 2 millions. A million. But of course, that's not what a million is. The good news is that by calling it billion, that set up trillion and quadrillion and then sextillion, etc. But as we've talked about before, $1 billion is a lot. People have their favorite comparisons, right? Stacking up paper or how many seconds it is comparing $1 million to $1 billion. It's a lot. Giving $1 million to a political enterprise is a lot. When we were starting political enterprise and a nonprofit, and we got a 6-figure pledge, it changed everything. I mean, for 2.5 years, I was working for essentially no pay, and then we got a pledge of a very large contribution, and it made us a real boy. It is a real organization in some respects. $100,000 can matter. $1 million is a big donation. We just learned yesterday, it happened a while ago, but it wasn't publicized, and now we know why, that $1.6 billion was donated by somebody I'd never heard of before to Leonard Leo. I mentioned this before the break, but it's worth really understanding. What does $1.6 billion do? Well, if you can put it in the stock market and make, an S&P 500 returns 11.88% since 1957, since the S&P 500 started, historical returns that include the stock market crash get it to closer to 10%. So let's just use that 10% number. If it put in the stock market, it would produce $160 million every year. $160 million would make it one of the largest, just a tenth of it, would make it one of the largest political funded enterprises in the country. But let's say what you do is you take you take the 160 million, you take those stock market returns, and you salt away half of it, so it'll always exceed inflation. It'll always be the biggest amount of right-wing money in the country, or one of them. And you just take half, you take $80 million. And you do that every year. But maybe because of that mechanism, you can't do it. The stock market's up and down a little bit. So you can't do it fully, right? So let's just get it down to 50 million. What that means is that every year, you could spend $1 million in every state in the union. $1 million in every state in the union. Leonard Leo is the person who has been, as much as just about anybody, the architect of the current court. Clarence Thomas called him the third most powerful person in the country. Excuse me. Clarence Thomas called him the third most powerful person in the world. I think he probably meant President Vladimir Putin, number one and number two in some order. I'm taking the president number one, by the way. The idea that this kind of wealth, I'd said, the challenge with wealth at some point is not begrudging success, is not rooting against somebody adding value. At some point, we have to think about power and control. At some point, we have to think about, an amount of money is no longer about what one can buy, unless we're talking about what they can buy as power. Right now, the very largest contribution to a political advocacy group in history was just made. It will be an impact on American politics. It's a reason why middle-class folks and everybody, including benevolent rich folks, have to pitch in for democracy. We'll be back, 202-808-9925. It's also why I'm so grateful to all of you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. There's a line open, 202-808-9925.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Francis Moore Lepay's Diet for a Small Planet, 50th Anniversary Edition, just reissued. And this is from the introduction to the 50th Anniversary Edition. It starts out with a quote from George Orwell. To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle. I begin this journey with the realization that growing and eating plant-centered diets was a great choice. Today it's a no contest necessity. Either we now make a big turn, or life on Earth as we know it is gone forever. Whoa, this blunt declaration rocks me. I'll admit it has taken me decades to get here, and I'm delighted now for this opportunity to share my learning journey with you, dear reader. You'll forgive me, though, if my first thoughts are of my own delight, as over the years, strangers have told me, your book changed my life. One story I'll surely never forget is from a friend and longtime head of the Berklee College of Music, Roger Brown. Quote, I was teaching in a small village in Kenya in 1979 when I came across a tattered version of your book, he told me. I read it on a mountain by moonlight, and it changed the course of my life. I'm still smiling. When anyone tells me of the book's effect on them, I always have to blurt out, yeah, me too. Diet for a Small Planet started as a one-page handout when I was 26, and it has profoundly shaped my life's quest. Now, in its 50th anniversary, I strive to capture key lessons that help me to this day, and that I hope will help you in these challenging times. Challenging doesn't quite do it. Over the past few years, we have been battling the fiercest storm of my lifetime. Years of attacks on the integrity of our democracy, leading to the first ever citizens' assault on the Capitol, a pandemic deemed the worst in a century, and murders by police that have fueled the Black Lives Matter movement, furthering, we can hope, our nation's long-delayed reckoning with systemic racism. At the same time, our climate crisis nears a tipping point that will drastically hasten destruction. And what first shocked me into action, hunger amid plenty, has gotten worse in recent years, even though the world's food supply offers 1/5 more calories for each of us than it did 50 years ago. Here at home, hunger is also rising. But in a mighty storm, sometimes the biggest tree comes crashing down, and for the first time, we can see its roots. Now is such a storm. So how do we grasp the roots and use what we discover to pull ourselves back from catastrophe and guide us toward life itself? Excuse me. The great news here is that millions in the United States and many more around the world are grasping the root causes of our intertwined crises and remaking their lives in ways aligned with what humans and natures need to thrive. 50 years ago, my youthful aha was that food has special power, as every day our very personal food choices connect us to each other and to all of nature. Shock in discovering the needlessness of hunger triggered in me new ways of seeing what's profoundly amiss in our world and even our power to fix it. Back then, I had no idea how urgent my message would soon become. Driven by tightening corporate power over our democracy, harms from meat-centered agriculture and diets have continued to mount, damaging human health, the natural world, and the climate. And now the ultimate harm. We have destroyed so many species, largely in feeding ourselves, that we face the 6th great extinction of life on Earth. To avoid planetary disaster, warns natural historian David Attenborough, we must allow the reflourishing of life by greatly reducing the land area we farm. And, quote, quickly and the most effective way is to change our diet, end quote. Moving beyond the vast inefficiency of meat-centered eating and choosing plant-centered diets, he projects, would cut in half the land use and still produce plenty of food for all. Now, with vastly more at stake than when my own eyes first opened, it's critical to grasp how we got here. So let's go for those roots. Over the 50 years since I sat in the UC Berkeley Library pondering the root causes of hunger, I've tried to keep digging into the question beneath the question to help me grasp why we humans have messed up so badly. And here's the deepest question my digging has turned up so far. Why are we together creating a world that as individuals none of us would choose? After all, I've never met anyone who gets up in the morning vowing to make another child starve or to turn up the planet's temperature. In the 20th anniversary edition of this book, I introduced the power of ideas to explain what seems inexplicable. I invite you to read my introduction to that edition directly following this one. Today, I express the root challenge this way. While seeing is believing is a common expression, for our species, the reverse is often true. Believing is seeing, or as Albert Einstein put it more directly, it is theory which decides what we can observe. In other words, our internalized filters can blind us to solutions right in front of our noses, requiring precisely the constant struggle George Orwell calls to us in that opening quote. One filter above all blocks us from solutions. a belief that life is still made out of parts, when in truth all life is connected. I can see in my mind's eye the twinkly grin of the late German physicist Hans-Peter Dürr, who a decade ago laid it out to me simply. Frankie, in life there are no parts, only participants. Got it, Hans-Peter, and I've never forgotten, and it is the core truth of our being. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us.
We're back. It's the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff Smith. You are you. Thanks for being here. Call in number 202-808-9925. As is my want, as is our want, we talk about democracy and also the threats to it, and also the $1.6 billion gift by Bar Seed. Am I getting that name? First name Bar, B-A-R-R-E, last name Seed, S-E-I-D. Chicago industrialist, 90 years old. It's like Mr. Burns, man. It's like Mr. Burns gave $1.6 billion to Leonard Leo to make it so that courts don't stop and the conservative doesn't stop at abortion abolitionism. And did you see this, by the way? Did you see this in the New York Times? The abortion abolitionist movement, which goes beyond what, let's say Brett Kavanaugh would say, and says, and makes a pretty clear argument. The argument is, well, if life begins at conception, and if, therefore, a fetus is a human life, and then if ending that human life is murder, then the death penalty needs to be on the table for the woman who has an abortion and for the doctor who performs that abortion. That there is, and if you track each of those arguments, and if you don't define life to say, no, life has to include some portion of self-sufficiency and some portion of the mother's choice, even the definition of life. And if you extract any of the woman's agency, any of the mother's agency in that decision and in that development of that life, then, to them, that argument really tracks. And now they're putting out legislation, and there is no obvious limit to that except for beating them. And Leonard Leo is putting people on the Supreme Court, and courts and courts and courts and courts, not just Supreme Court. And now trying to build a conservative movement beyond that with the biggest gift in history. And now the two biggest moves, like Bloomberg has put in some real money, but you combine what the Koch brothers have done and Leonard Leo has done, and now Bar Seed is done with Leonard Leo, and it's a muscle machine, man. I mean, that's big stuff. What should we do about that? What should democracy lovers do in the face of gargantuan capital investments like that? What should we do? What would you do? What do you think we can do? Well, one thing, we'll do this, and I want to take your calls and get to them. Kent has been the most patient listener from Altadena, California. Cute town, Altadena. Kent, how you doing?
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for filling in for Tom. I'm a relative newbie here with the
welcome.
show. Yeah, thanks. At first, I was like, well, I don't know what to expect. I didn't know who you were, but I really enjoy watching your shows over while he's been out. So
thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. The American dream. I mean, I just for kicks, I looked up, the text of the Magna Carta the other day. And, I want to count it, how many things have to do with financial and monetary things as opposed to, obviously we don't want to illegal search and seizure. We want to be free from, we want our privacy and stuff like that. But I think like the majority of things had to do with economics, like leave me alone so I can, don't take my money, don't take my property. And everything is so confabulated now. I think that $1.6 billion buys influence.
Yep.
And I wonder if I wouldn't rather have the influence from the influencers than all of that money. I don't know. But
that's interesting. So I want to make sure I'm not mishearing you. You're saying, when you say you'd rather have the influence from the influencers than all that money, say more. Say what you mean.
Well, because in the final end of it, that money is for influence. They're going to use that money to try to brainwash people and put out propaganda to make the 99% vote for the Fox is in charge of the hen house. They're going to make us vote against our own good because we don't have enough sense to go against them, I guess.
By the way, you just said something that I want to steal, if you don't mind. You said vote against our own good. I've heard people say vote against our own self-interest, and I've never loved the phrase because, if you're a Rousseauian, if you're somebody who cares about other folks just than yourself, you think that's part of what democracy is caring about more than just yourself. Never loved the line, vote against your self-interest, even though I know that it captures something really important. But you said vote against our own good. And good can include self-interest, but it also can include good, which might go even beyond that. I love the line. I have to write it down rather than forget. It's brilliant.
You're welcome to it.
So I want to reply. There are a couple things. In some degree, I think it's the good news, right? Like what happened with Progressive Era 20 years ago. The dawn, 1906 maybe to start. What's the dawn of the 1900 maybe the start of the, well, let's call it 120 years. There was this cascade of capital, right? The industrialists starting to run things. And then people realized, well, we're going to have to not just listen to all that. We're going to have to do things that aren't just that. Some of the greatest change that has happened, in fact, a friend of mine argues that all the greatest change that has ever happened has not been done because primarily it was well-funded, right? It was done because people just decided it needed to happen. And one of the things that has to happen in the same way, how do you compete against Fox News? Some of it has to be fewer people have to really heed it. Fewer people have to believe it. You just have to, okay, well, that's going to be that over there. We're just treated as noise. And that's one of it. No, we've got to have influencers that are priceless, that are worth a lot, not for sale. That's got to be part of the answer. But you said something just prior to that I wanted to respond to. That's what happens when there's 2 points. So that was the second thing. What was the first thing you said, Kent?
Oh, about most of the Magna Carta was to protect the finances?
Yes, thank you. All right. And then I do want to get to another caller. Thank you much, Kent, but I do want to reply to that. Yeah, as the arc of history has bent in no gentle curve towards something approaching justice, we hope, not only has it happened in a bumpy, jagged, painful, sharp way, and as well as a slow way, but very often, like Magna Carta, just be clear, that was nobles getting together and saying, hey, we want to protect our noble stuff. And that wasn't a workers' rebellion, that was nobles. And by the way, noble men. As we've moved forward in history, the entitlement to justice, the sense that someone even could be born and say, hey, wait a minute, I deserve something fair. Even just that sense, hey, wait, I deserve something fair, that is expanded. It has to be expanded. But I appreciate the point of the Magna Carta. It's a good reminder. I want to go to Dave from, is it Traverse City? Traverse, thank you.
But spelled like Traverse. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
And if you've never been here, they call it the Caribbean of the North, Jeff.
I gotta come. It sounds fantastic. It sounds slightly oxymoronic, but I think it's great.
Well, it's a good segue into what I want to talk about.
They call South Texas the Arctic of the South. I don't think they do. Go on.
It's almost an oxymoron. That was a segue because I think we have a bigger problem than just Fox so-called news. On a nightly basis, Fox, which apparently, has the biggest draw, might get, 1% of the country listening or watching them?
I haven't done the arithmetic on Fox News listenership compared to population. I should have, but I haven't done it.
Yeah, well, I'll bet you it's probably 1%. The systemic problem I think we have is kind of interwoven in the American dream, and that is we are a recreational society, Jeff. That's where we put our priorities. Ask the average Joe on the street about politics, and he'll give you what? He'll give you soundbite politics. He'll give you a 2 or 3 word answer.
Yeah.
Ask him about recreation and his favorite team, and he will give you statistics that'll blow you away.
Yeah. So by the way, you're right. It looks like they get less than a percent, maybe 1% of voters, right? They get like 1.5 million viewers, and
right.
yeah. So your point is the challenge that we live in sort of a soundbite politics society. How do you articulate the challenge of that? I mean, I got my thoughts, but how do you think about it?
Well, as far as articulating the challenge, are you referring to the solution to this? Is that what you're asking?
Either way, no. I actually why does it matter that it's? I was thinking you just say more about why it matters that we're in soundbite politics, because we don't dwell on nuance and think about some of the more important problems, and we just go to wherever kind of the brightest light is.
You could call it the brightest light. I call it, where we feel good.
Yeah.
What makes us personally, what gives us, it's self-indulgence.
Yeah, and do you have? It wasn't the question I asked, but I liked your question. And what is your solution? And solution might be too strong a word, but what is your response? What is a thing or 3 things that you think we ought to do?
Well, that's a tough question to answer. I mean, when it's so interwoven in the American dream, it's hard to answer that question.
Well, I'll take a crack.
I think everything starts with education and in the classroom. And when sports is the priority, from the time the kids enter school.
No, I hear you. We're going to break. Education's a big one. Also, I'm a fan of this show and working locally, because then you got to actually listen to your neighbors. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. Thanks for being with us. We'll be right back. 202-808-9925. Ben from Silver City, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi, Jefferson. I talked to you yesterday about VoteNowOrNever.com.
Oh, yeah.
Today I want to talk about the abortion deal.
Great.
How many people were pregnant during the 40 days of 40-night flood that God put on the earth? Was there anybody that was pregnant or had a zygote in them or a fetus and that died? That was one of the bad people? So why do Christians say God doesn't want anybody to die or to be killed that way when he had that done himself?
I think,
what do you think about that?
So, yeah, it's a good question. And I'll be an armchair theologian from time to time, but I should be humble when I do it. That I think that the Christian and the fundamentalist Christian who tries to find consistency in the Bible, right, and treat it as the work of one pen. The way they would probably put it is, well, yeah, God wants to be able to make the decision that God killed in the Old Testament, and God can kill, God can end life. But that doesn't mean you can, because you're not God. I think that's.
Right.
I think there are other people of faith, Christian people of faith, who see a difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and think that even in the development of Christianity, the arc of history was bending towards justice. Even then, it was like, well, maybe we shouldn't just live by Leviticus all the time. Go back and check out Leviticus, right? And maybe we should love thy neighbor, and maybe we should turn the other cheek, and maybe we should turn the tables of the money changers, and maybe we shouldn't wage war and kill others. And I, of course, embrace the latter view more closely than the former.
Right. I believe in God's free will, okay? And the free will is basically giving people examples or talking to people rather than legislating stuff, right? Legislating laws, you can't do this, you can't do that. Because you're not God, you can't say that, okay? And so the big point I have is just basically if life is not to be taken by us, God took life himself. Just by, you can't tell me nobody during the flood that was, deemed as undesirable and drowned can't tell me nobody was pregnant in any way.
No, and I think you're right. And I gave my biggest response. And by the way, what's your dog's name?
Oh, that's Colleen.
All right. Well, we're big. Dogs are always welcome. No, dogs are always welcome. That lets me know that your dog misses you and would like to kiss your face. So I want to get to the next call. I would appreciate you.
How's Tom doing?
He's it's a rough go. I think he's going to be fine, and the surgery went really well. But it's back pain is painful, and he's dealing with it. Right. So I think he was actually hoping to be back today, but he's now asked me to come in tomorrow. So we had a couple listeners who said he should take a full week. He should take a full week. That'll be up to him. He's still, I think, planning on being here Thursday. But he'll come on the calendar that he and his mental health professionals say. Which is, by the way, I think the kind of choice we want in other scenarios as well. Thanks, Ben, for calling. Michael. Oh, we're about to go to break. We're about to go to break in a second. Michael, if you can bear with us, we'll be back in just a moment. You are listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We're about to take a break. What to you are the responses to the cavalcade, to the amassment of anti-democracy capital, like the $1.6 billion that just went to Leonard Leo? 202-808-9925.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program.
Shannon from Grass Valley. Grass Valley becoming one of my favorite towns in California, although I've never been to my knowledge. Shannon, how you doing?
Hi. Okay. I just got in my truck, but I'm going to get out so you don't have to listen to my truck. Okay,
I don't hate trucks. I don't love trucks as much as I love dogs, but I'm not mad at the truck. Keep going.
Okay. I just had to go get some leaves for my goats because it's hot and dry. But I'm calling because I'm furious. Like, I heard what you said about somebody's, I don't know who it is, making the argument about it's murder if you have an abortion, and then it logically follows that the woman should be tried for murder. And, okay, let me just say, I just want to point out, it's always men making these rules.
Yes.
It's always men bringing the punishment. There is never, ever mention of men in the equation of getting pregnant. And there's never any mention of how 100% took away women's right to bodily autonomy with Justice Alito and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, who I just can't even go there. Okay, so they made this rule, and it comes down on half the country. Actually, more than
a little more than half, yeah.
Yeah. So I am just livid that this argument can even be brought without even mentioning that men have half to do with it. And, it's just infuriating. If we took away one single right of a guy in this country, like just wearing a mask, they couldn't even handle to help their old relatives and people who are fragile.
Or how about Shannon? How about doing a background check before you get a military weapon?
Yes, 1,000 times yes. And as a woman, if you men out there who mostly talk on these shows, I always listen, but it's always men calling in, blah, 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 religion this, blah, 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 religion that. I don't care what you believe. I don't care if you believe the ark is a real thing and all those stories are real and literal and true. I don't effing care. I care that I live in a country that doesn't mix church and state, and I don't belong to your religion. And maybe I'm a nicer person because of it. And maybe you don't need to tell me what to do with my body. And if you don't think I'm not taking 25 of my best girlfriends to the polls, you're wrong. So look out.
Amen, Shannon. I got a bunch of things. To amplify. I so appreciate the call. You can hang up or stay, whichever one you want.
Thank you.
So it's so important. And I'll say, so a few thoughts that occur to me, and I can't say it better than you did, but a few thoughts that occur to me is one, I think, the main interviewee by the New York Times was a dude preacher, right, who was making this argument. And And it absolutely is misogynist at its root, no question. And at best, the most favorably that I can define it is blindly misogynist. But I don't even think it's all that blind. But another thought that occurred to me, Shannon, is that this is the thing, for those who are motivated to maintain a patriarchy, restricting women's what have been viewed as fundamental freedoms, restricting, to use your term, bodily autonomy, is I actually think the militating act that's going to lead to a rise of a greater matriarchy. Like, I actually think that's what's going to, I think you're not going to be the only person, in my own sense, you're not probably the only person who's going to bring 25 friends to the polls. That you're right, by the way, they did studies in law school, right, that law students, that male law students were more likely to raise their hand than law students identified as women, and that was just a sort of a standard thing, and that trying to figure out how to make legal education be sort of more welcoming to everybody who comes and can be a good lawyer. That I think it's also true in talk radio, right? I mean, listen to me, I'm a loudmouth, and I came into the world with cultural expectations that was okay. And my wife is maybe the funniest person I've ever met, and she came into the world with cultural expectations that if she were, if she were too funny in the wrong context, that she might not seem ladylike. And that didn't seem to bother her at all. But I recognize that that also the other thing you said, there were like 3 things in that I wanted to reply to, but mostly I wanted to say thank you for listening, thank you for engaging, thanks for calling, and thank you for bringing 25 of your friends to the polls, because that's what it's going to take to save democracy. Shannon, anything you want to say before I go to the next caller?
No, I've taken up too much of your time. I appreciate your time. Thank you. We
appreciate you. All right. Let's go to Charisse from Corona, California. Is it Charisse? Did I get it right?
Yes, it's Charisse.
Thank you, Charisse.
I'm just calling because I'm so feeling what Shannon just said. Right on, sister. Yeah, that's right. I'm sick of us listening to books by old men in the desert telling women what to do. Okay? And you're talking to a person that went to vacation Bible school and all of that. I was brought up super Christian.
Amen,
okay.
Charisse.
I want to talk about old rich dude that's dumping all this money to try and squash democracy and what women want to do.
Yeah.
You asked, what should we do about that?
Yeah.
I say, first, we should all do something that would not only be good to stop rich people from bossing us around, but to also do something good for the environment. I think on Saturday, if he wants to dump money, on Saturday, we should all just not buy gas for a day. It's high as hell anyway out here in California, and really, ride a bike that day. Let's give the earth a break, and at the same time, let these rich people know that the people can cause an earthquake, too, with our money. We can take our money. They can throw their money at us, and we can throw it right back at them by not spending anything. If you can, don't shop. Don't buy anything Saturday. Don't participate in capitalism. If they want to participate in the government, we won't participate in it with them, okay? That's one thing. 2, on this abortion thing, we need to get men out of our boxes. And so I'm saying that women, we need to put them on call and put them on strike. And that means that no loving until y'all learn to respect our oven. We are not going to have sex with
Wait. Charisse, I want to make sure I heard it right. I believe you said no loving until men learn to respect our oven. Did I hear it right?
Yes, that's what I said, sir.
Charisse, you made my day. Thank you for calling, Charisse. I appreciate you. I can't say it better than Charisse. I'm supposed to talk for about 10 seconds here because there's like the song going and the commercial. I'm supposed to talk for like 6-7 seconds. How am I supposed to do that except to say no loving until men respect our oven? Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website.
That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back!
Our book today is by Anita Hill. It's titled Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence. And this is from the introduction. It's titled Boiling the Ocean. I am by nature a very private person, raised by a mother who is extremely private. People meeting my mother for the first time usually mistake her quietness for arrogance. They call me stuck up, my mother would say, but I'm not, she insisted. As an adult, I came to realize that this incredibly strong-willed mother of 13 was shy. When she was sure of something, we all knew it, and there was little chance of winning an argument with her. By we, I mean my father, my 12 siblings, and me. She was barely 5 feet 2 inches, remaining slight even after she gained weight in her middle age, but she seemed to tower over us. Her position as the youngest daughter of her farming parents' 14 children, and the determined woman who, from the day she married my easygoing father at 16, farmed alongside him to support our large family, seemed at odds with her shyness and her insistence on personal privacy. Life on a subsistence farm afforded little chance for solitude, let alone secrecy. But she claimed as much of it as she could and encouraged me and my 5 sisters to follow suit. I sometimes chalk up her wariness of exposure to the racialized world in which she grew up. My father, George, her brother, once told me bluntly, "If you talk about harm done to you, those people will use it against you." I understood that for that generation, those people were white folks. And though my mother was more subtle, I knew that her advice, "Don't ever share your personal business, people will judge you," was rooted in a similar understanding. Well, if you consider testifying about being sexually harassed in the workplace in front of an all-white male committee sharing your personal business, they were right about the outcome. For years, I had followed their advice, keeping to myself that I had been harassed into leaving my job as an advisor as the chair of the Equal Opportunity Commission, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I shared with only a few friends that Clarence Thomas's behavior had been the main reason I'd left Washington and returned to Oklahoma. When I did tell, testifying at Thomas's Supreme Court confirmation hearing, people of all races judged me. In hate mail sent to my office at the University of Oklahoma, on talk radio, in magazines and books, face-to-face and over the phone, they confronted and condemned me. I was still struggling to regain my sense of equilibrium after being thrown into the public spotlight when a call came into my office one afternoon. Without thinking or measuring the risk that it could be another threat or vitriolic rant, I picked up the receiver. In a deep, grainy voice that seemed both hesitant and threatening, the caller warned me that I had opened up a whole can of worms. The caller never mentioned his name. Anticipating what I was sure would be a diatribe, I at first wanted to hang up the phone, but instead, perhaps responding to the hint of vulnerability in his voice, I listened as the caller recalled being molested by an uncle and what happened when he finally gathered the courage to tell his family. Rather than rallying to protect him, his parents had judged him and accused him of making up stories. The Senate Judiciary Committee's members' questioning of me, he said, had reminded him of his own family's dismissive reaction. The pain of the molestation and his relatives' condemnatory response, he said, has stayed with me for years.
I mostly listened as he tried to make sense of his family's denial of their siding with his uncle. Surprisingly, though, our experiences differed. The hearing had affirmed his understanding of his own painful situation. It counseled him not to blame himself, putting his family's reaction in the context of a larger systemic and societal denial and taking away the sting of personal condemnation. To him, the whole can of worms that I had opened to the public was not limited to sexual harassment. It included incest, too. At the time, with my own pain still raw, I was guarded. Being open to hearing his story of survival was an act of courage on my part. No one had ever shared with me before that a family member had violated them. The caller's story was hard for me to hear, but not nearly as hard as it was for him to tell. And over the years, thousands have shared their experiences of abuse with me. The incest survivor imagined that my testimony would trigger feelings for survivors of other forms of abuse and show that sexual harassment is not the only problem. And he was right. Over the next months, letters describing behavior from workplace harassment to spousal abuse arrived every day alongside the hate mail, and I had to muster even more commitment and emotional bravery. In one ear were the denials, the warnings of the harms of accusations of sexual harassment, and challenges to the veracity of my claims. Some went as far as accusing me of inventing my entire testimony. In the other ear were the pleas for someone to see how society had abandoned victims of abuse. After a year of listening to countless stories of survival and attempts to survive, I became increasingly aware of the gravity of gender-based violence. In 1991, before the hearing, sharing experiences of gender-based violence was taboo. Yes, a few exceptionally courageous and forward-looking women sued in courts to stop harassment, but often the court reports reflected only a few of the details of the behavior they endured. Testimony was usually very curtailed. People who wrote to me told me things that they had never shared with their family members. Some had held their secrets for decades. A woman who I knew casually told me that she had been harassed by a former high school principal when she worked in the school office during World War II. The book by Anita Hill, Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jeff Smith sitting in. What's the digital divide? Why does it matter? And maybe what we can do about it. There are questions we might care about. As I've said before, and I've thought about before, imagine what it was like trying to operate in the world without a telephone in the 1970s. How would you apply for a job? How would you communicate with family? In the 90s and early 2000s, the internet was a luxury entertainment item, an extra advantage in many respects. Well, it's now probably more important than the telephone was 50 years ago. On the line is Dhanaraj Thakur. He's a research director for the Center for Democracy and Technology. We want to talk about the digital divide, at least to understand why it matters. And we've got some callers waiting that we'll get to as well. But I want to get to Dhanaraj Thakur right now. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, how are you?
I am well, and I hope you are well. And why do we care? Why do we care? I mean, I understand why I'd want the internet myself, but why do I care if somebody else has it?
I think it's very important then, that having more and more people connected improves our lives, right? Think about how we learn and share, how we reach out to friends, community, family, how we get involved, learn about politics, issues, and work. I mean, a lot of us are working from home. And that happens because other people, on our teams are working from home too. I think it's part of all our lives. And the way the internet works, by definition, it's a network of networks. It means that we have to be connected. So it can't just be a few of us online. the more people online benefits us all, actually.
And what's the scope of the divide? Digital divide's now a phrase, right? I assume it's measured. I actually have seen some measurements. What measurements do you use? What's sort of the scope of the challenge that we face in terms of, if you say everybody needs it, well, not everybody has it. Who doesn't have it?
Yeah, not everybody has it. I think some of the latest numbers I've seen is from like the Pew Research Center that says about 7% of adults don't use the internet in the U.S. They're mostly rural people.
And say the percentage again.
It's 7%.
Okay.
Of U.S. adults.
Yeah.
So mostly rural people, mostly older people, people of color.
Yeah.
But that's adults. Like if you look at school children, there's this problem of what's called a homework gap, where children don't lack internet access at home, which, as you know, during a pandemic, that's like very important. But just generally, it's very important for their education. According to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, about 17 million kids don't have access at home. So it's a big problem for specific communities, but I think across the board in the U.S., particularly with school children.
Yeah, and I think about summers, right? We know about the achievement gap, but we know about the delta between upper income students, lower income students in school performance. Is that gap starts out smaller, and it tracks during the school year pretty well together, and then over the summer it widens a little bit. And then the school year starts, and the achievement gap folks stay together. In the summer it widens a little bit, and they stay together, and then the next summer it widens a little bit. And you add 8 summers together, and all of a sudden there's a huge gap between upper income students' educational achievement and lower income students' educational achievement. And if one of the tools for staying engaged in going to virtual summer school or just reading something, right, is in fact having access, let's say, to a tablet, that's easier for some families than others.
Definitely, yeah. I think part of the issue also is, when we laid out, like, some kids don't have access, some kids don't, some kids do have access. There are programs to get them online, some of which are not that good. Like, we've heard stories about students sitting in a McDonald's parking lot, or people sitting in a Starbucks trying to get online. The problem with a lot of these methods is that because they can't afford it, these folks are driven to use networks that are less secure, right? So their data can be accessed by folks that should not be accessing it, right?
Yeah.
So there are potential problems with how we're trying to solve the digital divide that I think disproportionately impacts the people that are least off when it comes, and they're on the wrong side of the digital divide.
Interesting. So say more about that. Give an example of when we're trying to close the digital divide, that we're doing it in a way that, I don't want to go so far as to say makes it worse, but fails to reach some of the most important people we're actually hoping to reach.
Yeah, because I think what's happening is that you'll see programs that are trying to address the digital divide or the homework gap, for example. So let's look at what's happening with schools, right? So Congress has deputized schools to help the FCC identify students who qualify for what they have put in place is called the Affordable Connectivity Program, right? This is the government's way of subsidizing access to families that can't afford broadband access.
Yeah, the ACP. And by the way, I do want to put a plug. I think it's something that more people need. So many people don't even know it exists. And,
this is true.
And so many people don't know it exists. And they think when they're getting a discount from their telecom company, that's because their telecom company is being really nice, not recognizing that's actually was a manifestation of government that is doing that. And there are options out there that might be better than a coupon that's upselling you on more expensive internet or more expensive plan. But anyway, go on.
This is a very good point, actually, that you raised, that the marketing, the communication on ACP has not been, it's been exploited, put it that way, unfortunately. But so the FCC, in trying to figure out who needs this program, who should be, targeted with it, they'll ask schools, right, to help FCC identify students who qualify for the program. But what that means is then the schools will rely on sensitive information or providing sensitive information about the family's income, their socioeconomic status, like enrollment in a free and reduced price lunch program and things like that. That we need to make sure that that data is being used in a safe and legal way. In addition to that, when schools provide like students with laptops, or internet access, so they can work remotely, and especially for students that could not otherwise afford it, there are problems that we have identified in our research at CDT, at the Center for Democracy and Technology, where some groups of students, particularly those that need those kinds of devices and support, are subject to more monitoring by the schools and by outside vendors that provide like student activity monitoring software. So you have some groups of students. This may include like students of color, rural students, other students that have to rely on these programs that are more likely to be monitored, surveilled, and possibly subject to less secure forms of communication. So that's what I mean by when we are trying to address this program, we have to do it in an equitable way, right? So that privacy is not something that only people that are well off can afford.
So before we go to break, if you had one, you probably have 100, but if you had one thing that's sort of your favorite move to address the problem, what would it be?
Oh, I think a big issue here is trying to get students, trying to make sure that the vendors and the schools that are working with students to address the homework gap are doing so in a very safe and secure way, and that they do this in a very transparent manner. So they tell students and parents what they're provided with and what they're doing to protect them.
We'll be right back. You are listening to the Thom Hartmann Program, 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. Thanks for being with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with your calls in just a little bit. Dhanaraj, thanks for sticking with us for a minute. So, I heard you say that that we've got to make sure that when we're providing benefits, we're doing it in a safe and secure way. What are some of the best tools for doing that? And or who are the worst offenders who aren't doing it well? What do we have to watch out for?
I think we have to watch out for vendors, companies that want to offer schools software that, for example, they may claim will help them detect students with mental health needs, or students that are, should be are potentially breaking school rules and should be disciplined and things like that. Basically, I think school districts, administrators should be skeptical of tools that are going to be using some kind of automated means to try and address and determine these problems. A lot of what we found is that a lot of these kinds of automated tools, monitoring software and so on, have disproportionate impacts on different kinds of students, Black and Hispanic students, students with disabilities, LGBTQ plus students, and so on. I think school administrators and decision makers need to be aware of these things.
Well, I appreciate it. Where can people find out more? Where can people support your work or stuff that you want people to know about?
So a lot of what I mentioned here is available on our website, or reports or recommendations. It's at cdt.org. And you can find a lot more there about some of the issues I've mentioned and our concerns around how to safely and securely address the homework gap and digital divide.
Dhanaraj Thakur, Research Director, Center for Democracy and Technology. Thank you so much. And the Twitter feed is at Sendemtech, CENDEMTECH. Thanks so much for being with us, man. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for your work.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, be well. We've got another minute or so during this segment, and want to get to calls because people have been waiting patiently. I do want to say that as we talk about democracy and equity and giving people a real chance, that now it is something I've become sort of passionate about. is how do you have the basic means? And that includes housing, right? How do you have, not everybody having equal results in everything, but how do you have a real chance? That means education. Got to make sure you get a good one. Make sure you got to have some food to eat. And you got to make sure that if you're sick, you got a chance not to stay sick. And now it means you got to be able to communicate. And in the modern world, that communication, we love it. People use radios. One of the reasons I'm still a big fan of this being a radio show, not just a radio show, but also a radio show, is the data plan for radio is real cheap. Right? You can get a radio relatively affordably, or it's in your car, and the data plan is $0 a month. It's still magical technology. For so many things, that radio isn't going to, that landline isn't going to cut it. So appreciate the people who are doing work on digital divide, and it'll be a theme that to the extent that I continue these discussions, I hope that we'll continue to talk about it. If you know about something out there that you think we ought to be talking about, please let us know. Penny from New Harmony in Utah, it is your turn, Penny.
Oh, good. I'm excited.
Hang on just for a second. Hang on just for a second. We're going to hear this music break, and then we'll come right back to you. Just stick with us.
Okay. Thank you.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com.
So if you want to know what the Republicans are for, you'll recall, President Biden recently in his one-year anniversary of becoming president speech said that, who would have imagined that all they were in favor of doing was just obstructing anything I'm doing. And then he went on to say, what are the Republicans for? What does Mitch McConnell stand for? Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, actually went and talked with a number of Republican senators when he was thinking about running for the Senate, asked them, what are you guys doing? And they said, we're just here basically obstructing Biden. That's all we're doing. And Sununu said, screw that. I'm not going to run for the Senate then. He said they were all, for the most part, content with the speed at which they weren't doing anything. It bothered me that they were okay with that. So then, Mitch McConnell got asked by an NBC, Leanne Caldwell at NBC, what are you guys going to do if you get elected? And McConnell said, I'll tell you after the election. This is nuts. We got a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. We're going to go straight to Penny from New Harmony, Utah. It's a lovely name, New Harmony, Utah. Go ahead, Penny.
Well, I grew up in a very conservative Mormon community in Southern California.
Okay.
And I came to my senses at some point, and I watched Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney. I see them as people with integrity. I don't agree with them on almost anything, but I think they have a sound stance, and they're not involved in their political future. But they stand up for what they think is right, and like I said, I don't agree with them on almost any stance.
Yeah.
But
But you appreciate the move to at least try to hold Donald Trump accountable, at least try to maintain some semblance of rule of law and apply it to a president, even a Republican president, when they're in Republican states and representing Republican constituents. And Penny, thank you so much. And I want to say something about it. and I've heard this sort of back and forth. It's like, thank you to Liz Cheney. And others say, well, don't lionize Liz Cheney too much. Remember what she did about blank, or what she thinks about blank, or what she did about this. And I'm going to steal this from somebody. I can't quote them because I don't remember who wrote it. But to paraphrase, they said, I agree. I agree with Liz Cheney about just about nothing. I think she's wrong on just about everything. In fact, I agree with her on one thing, but it's the most important thing. And if we're going to have a pro-democracy consensus, that's not a one-party state, right? In fact, if you have a one-party state, it doesn't look like democracy. Some would say a two-party state barely does it. That you're going to have people that disagree in a democracy. That's sort of the point. And we hope to make it based on best ideas and best values, not merely based on best wallet, best wielding of power, best propaganda. We hope. We've got work to do on that front. But I think it is worth shouting out that if we're going to have a pro-democracy consensus, that pro-democracy consensus, or at least just supermajority, that has to include people like Liz Cheney. It has to include people like, at moments, Mitt Romney, who I think do have pieces. I mean, I'll give you my own diagnosis. To me, one of the things that happened, did I give you my conspiracy theory before? Here's my conspiracy theory. So Dick Cheney has been heavily linked, right? I mean, think about the invasion, occupation of Iraq. Has been very closely linked to the very highest and deepest levels of American intelligence and the American military. For Dick Cheney, for John McCain, their base of power in many ways was in fact what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. And the fact that Liz Cheney was willing to sacrifice her seat in Congress, she exacted a real price, suggests to me that she was getting from pretty well-placed people that stuff about the Trump administration was pretty darn wrong. And that her dad knew that, and that people who aren't allowed to talk about it, who have access to classified information, know about it. And I wish more Republicans would hear that quiet note, which to me is a very, very loud note. Let's go to Nicholas. Go ahead, Nicholas. You got about a minute.
Oh, my God, I'm going to have to hurry here. In direct reference to your reference to Liz Cheney, the quote originally was from the great Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." But much what gets forgotten is the following paragraph of his. He says, "It's not forever that I will make them my friend, only during that combatant shared fight." And there we go for that.
Nicholas, actually, I want to push back a little bit. So I agree. I want to agree.
Use my whole minute up.
Okay, say your point. Say your point, and I'll wait. You go ahead.
Getting rid of money in politics. Until we get rid of capitalism, capital is money. Money is capital. Until we get rid of capitalism, there's always going to be money in politics. There always has been. There's always going to be. What we have to learn to do is work around it. Let them know we're not for sale at any price. George Orwell, someone called in and said something about the recreational society. I made a note here. Remember George Orwell, and the populace will be controlled by large screens broadcasting 24 hours a day sports, religion, and contrived news. So here we are.
Not for sale at any price. Nicholas, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being a moderator and helping out with the show. It means a ton.
All right.
Appreciate you. What I wanted to say about Liz Cheney, and I recognize that it can be an alliance of convenience, but the alliance that I see of convenience is maybe not convenient. It's not merely, oh, well, she didn't like a president that I also don't like. It seemed to be about principle, and that principle of democracy, and that I value that principle of democracy, and that's consistent. That is not only a convenience. That isn't just, I'm going to abandon them like Sun Tzu would do.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. The call-in line here is 202-808-9925.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Brainwashing of My Dad, How the Rise of the Right-Wing Media Changed a Father and Divided Our Nation and How We Can Fight Back by Jen Senko. This is from Chapter 6, How Talk Radio Hijacked My Dad. In 1984, Reagan was reelected in a landslide victory against liberal Democrat Walter Mondale. That year was also when everything began to change for my dad and our family. In 1984, Dad retired from his job with the federal government at age 62. Both my parents missed being near the shore, so they moved back to New Jersey and settled in Toms River, a town where there was a large retired population. Still energetic, my father got a part-time engineering job 3 or 4 days a week, necessitating a long solo commute by car. He didn't want to waste time on music while driving. He wanted to be stimulated mentally, and he discovered talk radio to keep himself company. At the time, Bob Grant was the dominant talk radio personality. Often called the conservative radio, Grant was an openly racist, sexist, far-right shock jock. On his WABC radio show, he referred to blacks and Hispanics as savages. He believed them to be inferior, and he once even called Martin Luther King Jr. a slimeball. With his combative and testy style, he was considered a pioneer of the talk radio format. Soon, Grant became my dad's commuting buddy. I didn't know Bob Grant from Joe Namath, but I did know I didn't care for his style of yelling at callers or hanging up on them if they disagreed with him. My mother was not a fan of Grant's either, and she delighted in telling me the story of how she ran into him one day. She was at the Ocean County Mall eatery, sitting at a table having lunch when she saw Grant walk in. She recognized him, and when he passed her table, she asked, "You're Bob Grant, aren't you?" He said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Oh, my husband likes you, but I don't." He had been walking away and turned to look back at my mother and gave a little laugh. She said she just sat there at the table and did not smile back. Gradually, it seemed my dad started becoming more agitated after listening to Bob Grant. Eventually, he became consistently more irritable, excitable, and easy to anger. Little did we know, a metamorphosis was beginning. Along with massive deregulation in the communications industry, there were several other factors that led to talk radio's explosion of popularity in the 1980s. The first was that music had moved from the AM dial to the high-fidelity sound of FM, and thus left a void on the AM dial. Broadcasters realized that filling that blank airspace with mainstream news wouldn't make much money. However, entertainment made money, and talk radio was entertainment at its finest, even when it masqueraded as news coverage. Human conversation didn't benefit from high-fidelity sound the way music did, so talk radio filled the void on the AM radio waves perfectly. The second contributor to talk radio's rise was the new accessibility of satellite technology, allowing anyone to broadcast a show nationally. And the third was the fact that when 1-800 numbers became available, you could have callers call in from all over the country. These factors combined to make a pretty powerful storm. The format of talk radio was, of course, not new. The format first debuted in the 1920s, continuing with Father Charles Coughlin's controversial and anti-Semitic radio broadcasts in the 1930s. Coughlin has often been referred to as the father of hate radio, and he paved the way for all that has come in his medium. Many of the most famous conservative talk radio personalities modeled themselves after the 1950s sensation Joe Pyne. His show, It's Your Nickel, consisted of Pyne debating his opinions with people calling in. Calls often culminated with him insulting the caller, to the delight of his audience. The format of talk radio evolved from there, but many of the most popular shows and hosts, including Bob Grant, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Glenn Beck, have stuck with the confrontational tone and high-emotion interactions that these early hosts introduced. There haven't been many successful liberal talk radio hosts. Ed Schultz, Randy Rhoads, and Alan Colmes tried to make inroads, but simply failed to draw a large audience, in quotes. You may wonder why conservative talk radio programs have been so phenomenally popular while equivalent liberal shows have foundered. Aside from big money to support it, the secret seems to lie in the inflammatory approach favored by these so-called conservative hosts. Abram Brown of Forbes says of liberal talk radio shows, it's not the same thing as a Limbaugh or a Hannity. It's more general, not really railing against the system. No one's yelling, we need to get rid of the Republicans. They're the worst thing that happened in this country. But you'll hear conservative radio hosts say that about liberals on their programs. Brown makes another good point that speaks to that. Tell your audience that the mainstream media is corrupt and biased, that there's more than that then there's all the more reason to turn to your conservative talk radio to get the truth. Anger is a hot commodity. Finding an enemy is even hotter. Or as Ailes might say, it's the emotions, stupid. He did not actually say that. A little known but very chilling example of how powerfully influential radio can be is the 1994 Rwandan genocide, where an estimated 800,000 citizens were brutally murdered by their fellow citizens, the Hutus. This happened after an intense radio campaign that started in 1993 dehumanized and demonized one group, the Tutsis. Militia groups were formed, and police and soldiers joined them in the killing. Samantha Power, who later served as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, said killers often carried a machete in one hand and a transistor radio in the other hand. That discovers Rush Limbaugh. About a year or so after working part-time,
our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
We got a couple guests in the third hour. We're going to have Malia Lazou from Urban Labs, and we're going to have Layla Abulfazi from the National Women's Law Center. And that means I want to try to do a speed round during this half hour so we can get through a bunch of your calls. We're going to start it right now with Paul from Woodinville, Washington. How you doing, Paul?
I'm doing good, thanks. So we have to stop taking the bait with the extremist right wing about whether life begins at conception, human life begins at conception, or whether a fetus is a person. First of all, by the way, human life is continuous. It doesn't begin at conception. A sperm is a human life, and an ovum is a human life. They both happen to be haploid genetic forms of human life. So when they say, "oh, conception," they're already starting to set conditions on their argument. So I'm happy to say this. Let's start with the premises. Okay, human life begins at conception, and a fetus is a person. And then when we do that, we find very quickly, if we just look at the constitutional implications, that premise falls apart very quickly. Because the 14th Amendment says that you have to be born. That's the very first sentence in Section 1. You have to be born or naturalized, which means you also have to be born to be naturalized, in order to be entitled to due process and equal protection of the law. And Article 4, Section 2 says only citizens. By the way, you have to be born to be a citizen. And Article 4, Section 2 says that only citizens will enjoy rights of the several states or fundamental constitutional rights. So a fetus, even if you want to say that it's a person, it has no standing. As a matter of fact, the fetus has kind of the same problem that Dred Scott had. Is a person, and slaves were counted as persons, 3/5 of a person, but it wasn't murder. It wasn't murder to kill a slave. Slaves were considered property. So just to say that an abortion is murder, that would say that this person, who's, by the way, occupying the body of another person, the mother who already does have standing, has citizenship, and is entitled to due process and equal protection under the law, is now occupied by another person that has none of those things. And we're to say that the state can then compel this woman to involuntary biologic and economic parental servitude for a period of years, 18 years plus the 9 months. And that is not permissible by the 13th Amendment, because that's converting someone into slavery to a fetus who's occupying her body. So if they want to go ahead and say that, let's say, okay, I accept your premise, and then your premise falls apart very quickly. No, the fact that a fetus, if you want to say it is a person, that doesn't mean that an abortion is a murder. It means no such thing. As a matter of fact, what it does indicate is that if that's converting a woman to slavery and by a fetus or a person that has no standing in the United States of America.
Paul, it's an interesting take, and thank you for it. A one-sentence way that I've heard it, it's a slightly different point, but that I've heard it said is, at what point does the liberty interest of the baby outweigh the liberty interest of a woman in her own bodily autonomy? And if the second thing doesn't matter at all, then I think your point of servitude, I'll use that, I'm comfortable using that term, I think does come up. And this is real stuff. Let's go straight to George from Chicago.
Thanks for taking my call, Jefferson, and thanks for being such an able pinch hitter for Tom. You do a great job.
Thanks, George.
And Paul is always so impressive. He just explained in constitutional terms why the Dobbs decision was unconstitutional. But that doesn't bother the justices who were vetted by the Federalist Society.
No, Paul's a smart guy, right? Forgive me for a moment, but I really value his call, and it's one of the reasons it's such a privilege to be able to do this, right? Because we get, the listenership is also a teaching body. But anyway, go ahead, George.
So, which brings me to the subject of my call. When you were talking about Leonard Leo and the depredations that he and the Federalist Society have brought upon the federal judiciary over the past, 40 years now, I think, it reminded me there was a related article in Slate on August 18th entitled, "Judges Are Now Using Their Retirements as Leverage Against the President" by Richard Ree, R.E., and it details something that's developed, at least since Trump was president, where federal judges are announcing their retirement, but they're adding a condition to their retirement. The most egregious case was a judge on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals here in Chicago, who was a very conservative Reagan appointee. His name was Michael Cann, K-A-N-N-E, or maybe Canne, I don't know. But he was going to retire if his former law clerk, who was the Solicitor General of the state of Indiana, would be appointed to take his place.
Yeah.
Well, that got scotched by internal Republican politics because Mike Pence, believe it or not, clouded with the president to say, no, I don't want this guy to be on the appellate circuit. He probably had his own candidate. In any event, nothing was done. And ironically, Judge Cann died in June. So that cost Trump a valuable appointment to the federal bench. But the seat is now still open. And with the game playing that the Republicans do in the Senate, it's a difficult slog to get somebody appointed to the federal bench. And they list in the article there's been a number of other cases, and this clearly indicates that judicial reform must be expanded to include legislation which will forbid the extension or taking of anything of value in exchange for resignation from
it's a
the
great
federal
point.
bench.
And it's a great point, George, and thanks for the call. And I actually think that would be, that feels like, well, I can't say anything's easy to pass in the modern world, but that seems like most senators and members of Congress House Representatives should agree, right? That you're not allowed to trade for your resignation. And of course, the Federalist Society is training folks up, training law students up, and then law clerks up, and then young lawyers up, and then young judges up, to be strategic and tactical with not only their appointment processes, like training them to say the words, when somebody asks them, what do you think about Roe versus Wade, to say the words, well, that's lasting precedent. And they didn't just say, I won't. It's not a full-on lie by the most, by a legal definition of the word lie. It's not perjury to say, well, it's standing precedent. Roe versus Wade, well, yes, it is. But the follow-up question of, well, would you ever consider getting rid of standing precedent? Would you get rid of Roe versus Wade? And they say, well, I don't want to speak. I don't want to speak to a particular case. I couldn't possibly speak to a particular case. Roe versus Wade is standing precedent. I believe in precedent. Well, look, the satisfying answer for Susan Collins to give her vote, to confirm. So they train you up on how to do that. Leonard Leo trained people up to do that. Now also training people up on being strategic and tactical on when they exit, to make sure they don't have a circumstance like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, an American hero, American heroine, and who stayed on the bench as long as she possibly could until she literally could not, until her life gave out. And that happened to be during a Republican presidency. And they want to make sure that that never happens. And they're educating about it. It's the prioritization that they have made. And by they, I mean core donors and strategists is a really important story to track. Dale from Bend, Oregon. Beautiful place in Bend. Dale, you there?
Hello.
Hey,
yeah,
Dale.
I'm here. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to submit something to you and let you run with it. And I was thinking, if the individuals like, Trump's sons and Giuliani, et cetera, who spoke and are speaking to the MAGA believers and caused the insurrection and death on January 6th are not held accountable for causing those deaths, then why was Charlie Manson incarcerated since he wasn't at the Sharon Tate murders? So I submit that all the people running for the GOP offices that are winning are asking, akin to the Manson and now the Trump family, and are believers believing in the lies and are causing the helter-skelter that Charlie Manson raved on about. So
interesting.
I just want to submit that to you.
Dale, interesting analogy. Your idea that that is not merely the person who shows up and does the deed, it's also the person who inspires them to do it. Judy, we got less than a minute, but you're up.
Hi, you had an earlier caller who asked you the question, what is the American dream?
Yeah.
And I grew up in the 1950s, and in my growing up, the American dream meant that each generation would have it better than the generation before it. I am a retired teacher, retiring in 2010. I used to ask my students what they thought the American dream was, and most of them didn't even have a clue, had no idea what it is. The few that thought they knew what it was said it didn't exist anymore for them. Thank you.
Jude, I appreciate it. And I had a chance to think a little bit more about it, thanks to your call, by the way, because I saw you in the call queue, and it even said, quote, American dream. Made me think about it a little bit. I can get out of 2. I think you stated it really well. I'll get it out of 2 for me. That everybody's got a chance to live a great life, get a chance to do better than their previous generation. And second, that important moments that people are in charge. That for me is the American dream, or at least the one I want to fight for.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We're doing a speed round right now. We can get to your calls, 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. Corky, you're on the air from Rochester.
Oh, it's good to talk to you.
Likewise.
I'm waking up thinking I'm dead. I'm in a different universe.
Okay.
I got the Republican laws that I have to live by. Now, if they go out and say 5 years, your Social Security's all done, I got to live by that. Or
say that again, Corky. You have to live by what?
Huh?
I missed what you said. You have to live by what?
I have to live by the Republican laws instead of the Constitution. I don't like that number amendment in the Constitution, so I'm not going to abide by it. I mean, I thought that was set in stone, the Constitution. It was a creed that we lived by, and it worked for, 250 years.
Yeah.
We had to fight a war for it. 1 million men died on the battlefield?
Yeah.
So it must have been important for them to go do that. And they serve a warrant to Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and he says, no, I'm keeping those. Those are mine. What? You come to my house, I don't get to say that. You're going to push me in a closet until you're done.
Corky,
I ain't going to have no lawyer there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, go ahead. Finish your point.
Well, we've got to come to a conclusion, a set of laws to live by, and make them constitutional, and we never have to look at that again.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the call. And the fundamental question, and it was Trump does so much crazy stuff, right? And some would say crazy like a fox, that it gets us talking about any number of things. The guy's not even president anymore, right? He's not even on Twitter anymore. But he gets talking about so many wacky things that it can distract us, that cacophonous treble can distract us from the deeper bass, kind of underpinning the symphony of the discussion, which was more sharply put into focus during the Nixon scandals. And that essential question that is a president above the law? And it's clear that a president cannot be above the law in the most important senses. That was the critical thing. On the margins, right? On the margins, but not on the most important stuff. One could say the most important thing. I mean, really, I used to hear it, and it just seemed like pablum. They'd say, "Oh, peaceful transition of power." Like, "Oh, what?" I really did. I'd hear it and say, "Blah blah." Politicians talking blah blah. Military people talking blah blah. There's a bunch of blah blah, blah 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 blah. But when I paused, and I probably because I was taking so much of it for granted. But when I paused on, let's say, January 7th, and thought about it, if you are going to have a system by which the leadership is not defined by accident of birth, is not by oppressive military conquest, nor primogeniture, then you have to have transitions of power, and it has to be peaceful. It is the most important thing. And by the way, it was Ian Millhiser's quote that Liz Cheney was wrong about maybe everything, but right about the most important thing. We'll be right back.
Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. Back during World War I under President Wilson, we had a windfall profits tax on war profiteers, essentially, of 95% above their normal profits. You were allowed to make your normal profits, but when you started making more than that, 95% tax on that income. President Franklin Roosevelt revisited the exact same thing, windfall profits tax, during World War II, saying he didn't want this war to produce any new war millionaires. During the Korean War, Dwight Eisenhower had a windfall profits tax. During the echo of the fall of the Shah of Iran, when all the Iranian oil was taken off the marketplace and the price spiked, President Ronald Reagan imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas industry to stop exploitation of that. Now we have Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate and Ed Markey as well, along with him, and Representative Jamal Bowman in the House saying, let's do the same thing now. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out.
We're not stopping. We're starting. Getting this thing rolling. We're democracy enthusiasts. Getting our democracy cellar to keep our democracy. I don't know. The analogy is going to break down in just a moment if it already didn't. We're going to keep with the speed round. We're going to go to Michael, 103.7.
Hello.
Hello, Michael.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm in a Faraday cage in an old Adobe home in Santa Fe, and I just wanted to tell you that I grew up on Martha's Vineyard, and I remember one day when Henry Kissinger flew in 3 containers that had everything that Jacqueline Onassis owned, because no one else would help her. And, she went to Miss Porter's school. She married our president. He was assassinated. And I remember sitting on the island with a gentleman who was the son of AT&T, And we were watching the debacle with the Nixon administration, and it didn't matter if you were Republican or Democrat. What really mattered was the Constitution, and we were all sitting there shaking our heads going, what the hell is going on? And there were two people that supposedly pushed or tried to push our Secretary of Defense, McNamara, off the Martha's Vineyard ferry. And the Secret Service was all over it, and supposedly they jumped overboard, and nobody knows what happened to them. And it was quite the debacle. But the people who ended up buying his house were Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. And, of course, they would fly in to do Saturday Night Live, and that was a show that many of us watched. And some of it was pretty accurate, and some of it wasn't.
Yep.
But the one thing that we really did pay attention to was my grandfather.
Michael, we're on speed round, so make your point so I can get to the next person.
All right, I'll make my point. I think that men like me who call in about issues like abortion, we should be lined up and shot. I really agree with your caller who said keep the lovin' in the oven. And with that, I'll shut up and let you take it from there.
All right, Michael. Well, I don't think we need to line up and shoot anybody. It'd be sort of ironic if ironic might be powerful enough a term, if we engaged in mass killings to, I don't know. I'd be confused by it. But I understand that some humility on the matter feels right. Let's go to Charlotte from San Diego. Charlotte, your turn.
Hi, Jefferson. I had two quick points. First, if you could maybe expand on the the fact that 6 members of the Supreme Court, and we know which 6 they are, plus this Leonard Leo, are all members of the, or I don't know if membership is the right word, but belong to Opus Dei or closely affiliated with it, and that's an extreme wing, I guess, of the Catholic Church, and how that affects the politics. And the other quick thing is, I think the way to, this is changing the subject, and I'm sorry, is I think that there's a selective service, and every boy or man that turns 18 has to register. I think that's still in effect, and it should also be mandatory that they have to give a DNA sample so they can be tracked down if they impregnate somebody. And that's it.
Charlotte, I appreciate it. And it does, the Pandora's box that is opened, the discussions that are necessitated by, will be triggered by the Supreme Court ruling to overturn Roe versus Wade, we're only beginning to see all the things. And it's going to necessitate questions that are going to be really uncomfortable for people who cheered the ruling. Be really uncomfortable. As for Opus Dei, I don't know how many of them are members. I do think the 6 of them got the Opus Dei seal of approval, and Leonard Leo is a board member of the Opus Dei's Catholic Information Center. And what Opus Dei is an extremist Catholic group. It's a group that really remembers or really trumpets pieces of Catholic teachings around abortion, and doesn't always remember stuff about healing the sick or helping the poor or loving thy neighbor or being a steward of the land. And the fact that we have theological control of a big piece of the court is a real issue. We're going to be coming back. We're going to have Malia Lazoo coming up next. Malia is somebody she started Boston Votes years ago. She was a really prominent activist. Now she is the founder of the Lazoo Group and Urban Labs. We're going to talk about what does it mean to be an American today. It's sort of how I opened the show with Langston Hughes. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox, no ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1 hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3 hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. It's how progressives and moderates can unite to save our country. This is from the introduction, titled The Opportunity We Dare Not Miss. Will progressives and moderates feud while America burns? Or will these natural allies take advantage of a historic opportunity to strengthen American democracy and defeat an increasingly radical form of conservatism? The choice in our politics is just that stark. This book is offered in a spirit of hope, but with a sense of alarm. My hope is inspired by the broad and principled opposition that Donald Trump's presidency called forth. It is a movement that can and should be the driving force in our politics long after Trump is gone. His abuses of office, his divisiveness, his bigotry, his autocratic habits, and his utter lack of seriousness about the responsibilities of the presidency drew millions of previously disengaged citizens to the public square and the ballot box. The danger he represented inspired young Americans to participate in our public life at unprecedented levels. Tens of thousands of Americans, especially women, have gathered in libraries, diners, and church basements to share wisdom, to organize, and in many cases to run for office themselves. These newly engaged citizens have created an opportunity to build a broad alliance for practical and visionary government, as promising as anything since the Great Depression gave Franklin Roosevelt the chance to build the New Deal coalition. To seize this opening, progressives and moderates must realize that they are allies who have more in common than they sometimes wish to admit. They share a commitment to what public life can achieve and the hope that government can be decent again. They reject the appeals to racism that have been Trump's calling card and the divisiveness at the heart of his electoral strategy. Together, they long for a politics focused on freedom, fairness, and the future. This new politics would be rooted in the economic justice that has always been the left's driving goal, and in the problem-solving approach to government that moderates have long championed. It's true that these camps often battle over whether the nation should seek restoration or transformation in the years after Trump. In fact, our country needs both. To restore the democratic norms we have always valued, we must begin to heal the social and economic wounds that led to Trump's presidency in the first place. Yet there is resistance to common ground among progressives and moderates alike. They often mistrust each other's motives, battle fiercely over tactics, argue over how much change our country needs, and squabble over whether specific policy ideas go too far or not far enough. The moderate says, hey, progressive, you think that if you just lay out the boldest and most ambitious approach to any given problem, the people will rally to your side. Really? For one thing, people may like your objective, but think you're changing things way more than we have to. And we can battle to the death over, say, a Democratic Party platform plank or the first draft of a bill. But without the hard negotiating and compromising that legislative politics requires, a bold idea will remain just a platform plank. That really doesn't do anyone any good. You subject everyone to so many litmus tests, so we might as well be in chemistry class. And God save us from your abuse on Twitter if we disagree with you. You lefties have no idea how to win elections outside of Berkeley or Brooklyn, and some of your ideas are so sweeping that they'll scare potential voters away. At this point, the moderate is likely to wield the sturdy old punchline, "Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good." But hold on, says the progressive. You moderates spend so much time negotiating with yourselves that you compromise away goals and priorities before the real battle even begins. Your ideas get so soggy and complicated that they mobilize no one and mostly put people to sleep. Better to have the courage of your convictions, lay out your hopes plainly and passionately, and inspire voters before to join in. Besides, you middle-of-the-roaders were so petrified of Ronald Reagan and the right wing that you caved into the Gipper's economic ideas, let inequality run wild, and gave us a racist and grossly unfair criminal justice system. The extremists have pulled the political center so far right that the only way back to sanity is to show our fellow citizens what a real progressive program looks like. At the risk of sounding like a perhaps unwelcome counselor attempting to ease a family quarrel, I would plead with moderates and progressives to listen to each other carefully. If the events since 2016 do not teach moderates and progressives that they must find ways of working together, nothing will. If they fail to heed each other's advice and take each other's concerns seriously, they will surrender the political system to an increasingly undemocratic right with no interest in any of their shared goals, priorities, and commitments. Moderates are right about the complexity of getting things done in a democracy. Even when the boldest ideas have prevailed, they did so because complex coalitions were built. Important, and it should be said often legitimate, interests were accommodated, and some lesser goals were left by the wayside to be fought for another day. Moderates are also right that democracy requires persuading those who are open to change but worry about how this or that reform might work in practice or affect them personally. Think losing their private health insurance. Disdaining as sellouts those who raise inconvenient questions or express qualms is not the way to build a majority for reform. Moderates are also right that Americans in large number are tired of politics that involves more yelling than dialogue, more demonizing than understanding. But progressives are right to say that for the last 3 decades, moderates have spent too much time negotiating with themselves. Consider all the effort Democrats put into wooing Republicans by responding to their proposals to amend Obamacare. The book Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our guest right now is a legend. She ran Boston Votes back in the day, mass votes back in the day, getting young voters to the polls and organizing people to engage in democracy. She was the political director for Certified Fancy People. She has more recently been a teacher at MIT, which I'll let her describe that. And thinking about who to talk about. We opened up with Langston Hughes today. Who to talk about regarding what it means to be an American today. There's nobody I can imagine enjoying that conversation with more than Malia Lazoo. Malia is with us right now. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
It is nice to hear your voice. Where are you right now?
I'm actually at home on my way to London in a few hours. So
that's fancy. What's happening?
You're joining me in my fabulous dining room in a 100-year-old house in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Welcome to it.
And what's happening in London? Are we allowed to know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going with my family.
Oh, good. All right.
Yeah, so you're allowed to know that, right? Like, I'm about to meet my mom and my stepfather there. So it's going to be a good time.
All right.
Talking about global white supremacy.
So how's global white supremacy going, Malia?
I think it's going well. I mean, I'll let you know what London says, but, I think I've been thinking a lot about that saying, right? Like the sun sets, sets in the west, right? Like, and what that might mean for Western civilization. But, it seems to be sustaining.
So I had this thought about the British people, that they did their racism was a slightly different flavor. It was a little quieter, and yet extraordinarily powerful. Do you have a view? Does it cross your mind? I don't need to call upon you to be the expert of all things regarding global white supremacy, but I'm interested in the British origins of a lot of where we are in the modern world.
Well, I mean, I think you can sum up the British origins, right, by saying, like, we learned it from watching you, Dad. Right? We learned it from watching you. I mean, England was horrific globally, right, and struggles with that. I think what makes the U.S. unique, right? So, like, when I think about Britain or France or, any of, like, the colonizers, right? But I think what's unique about the U.S. is that we all live together, right? The colonizers live on the land that they were colonizing, right? Versus the folks who own land in Haiti or, throughout the Caribbean or throughout Africa. And so we were living together in different ways, which I think made it more obvious, So I don't know if it's that we're louder about it or if it's just that for this whole experiment, in white, male, straight, manifest destiny, if we just don't have, we crash up against each other, right?
There was a distance. British racism was less about tilling the soil in the South and more about tilling the soil or doing whatever the heck by boat far away.
Right. It was happening over there, and and the Queen gets new jewels, right? Like, it's just it's something that they don't have proximity to, and it's I mean, I think they're learning it now, right? Because the colonies are coming home, and if you think about Britain and Windrush, I mean, I think it was last year, right? They were sending grandparents like back to Jamaica, right? Saying that they weren't citizens. So now that they're coming in proximity together more, we are hearing, the right, the pro-Brexit, the white supremacists of Britain say, right, wait a second, this generation, they're not British. And you're like, they fought in the war, right? It's the same story that we have. It's just that, we've been doing it since the revolution together.
It reminds me like Portland, Vermont, Minnesota, like places that have, let's say Minneapolis, places that have pretty strong liberal voting traditions, including on issues of civil rights, and at the same time, don't have the same proximity, to use your term, as, let's say, Alabama or, Tennessee.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think it's easy to be supportive when it's not happening in your school district.
Yeah.
Right. And I think school districts are a really important part of this plan, right? Like, it's anyone can say, like, oh yeah, we're moving there for a better school district. And that doesn't seem like some white privileged, some might even say, conversation that's steeped in white supremacy, right? Yeah. Like, so I think people are all for it until the best way to provide education is by sending everyone to the same schools. Right. And then it's like, oh, well, we didn't mean that. Right. And so, yeah, I think, Washington, Vermont, I mean, there's definitely, living in Boston, I go to Vermont enough to know that there are areas of Vermont I don't go to, and I went to a wedding in Maine and, I didn't stay the night. Like, I got a driver so I could get home, even, yes, there's progressiveness, right? But there's still America, right? There's still this idea that I'm not as safe as, let's say, some of my white counterparts might be in certain areas.
On the mean streets of Maine and Vermont, I hear you.
I tell you what, depending, right? Depending on what you're talking about, they can be really mean streets.
Listen. I've, like, not only am I white male, but I'm also tall and, like, I can do pull-ups. So it's like, I have to recognize my own,
Well, you could walk anywhere there, right? Like, I mean, you could just come in and be like, I'm it. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, no, that's what we want everyone to look like. Jefferson.
So I want to ask the sort of core question, which is maybe an unfair question, but it's, what is it to be an American today?
Today, right? Like, I wish you asked me that question in 2008. I mean, I think what it means to be an American today is to be, we're defining our values, and so I think, like, I'm asking myself, like, where are my lines, right? Like, where am I fighting for my rights, right? What am I caring about? And I think right now, figuring out what we should be caring about versus what is the most popular thing to care about versus what we actually can do. I have, like, all really different answers for, but also what I will say as an American who has dedicated, most of my adult life to trying to get change and to be sitting here today, I do wonder if, like, what it means to be an American now is to, like, especially for organizers, to, like, see what other countries have to offer, and I've just been, like, I was in Jamaica, and there's just so much opportunity there in just thinking about what they don't have because they're such a poor country, right? And there's all the predatory stuff, right? Like, and it's all these Black people living on this beautiful island. And I'm like, well, I could do banking, right? Banking, right? Like, they have some things, right? Like, and so I just wonder if what, like, being an American now means, like, what can we say and where do we put what we want to say?
Hold it there.
Right?
We'll be right back.
We sort of because the white.
Hold it there. They're going to commercial. We'll be right back.
Now, like, it's a white.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with Millie Lazou in just a second. I'm Jeff. This is Tom's show. This is your show. Millie, you got cut off for a second. Go ahead and continue that point.
I'm so sorry. No, but what I was saying is, like, I got immersed. Like, my latest soap opera has been the January 6th hearings.
Yeah.
And as I'm watching it, and especially when, like, the poll workers came on, but I just realized that, like, this whole insurrection and, like, the Cheney and, all the ups and downs and, like, all the story, it's not about me. It's not about anything that we've been asking for, any movement we've been pushing for. And I have to support it because, white folks can actually, they proved it. They can go to the Capitol and they can cause an insurrection that wasn't quote unquote successful. I'm not sure. I need to see more hearings, but, like, and I need to see the 2024 election, but, like, Black people couldn't have done that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, what do you think? Imagine.
I mean, we couldn't have done that in 2000, Jefferson, when we were working together.
Yeah.
And when there was another kind of coup. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, if all of a sudden our coalition, right? Like, just think about, right? Like, the units, the Black, if all of a sudden we were to have gone to the Capitol and we probably had, like, a little better of a legal argument. I don't know. You're the lawyer.
No, a vastly better legal argument. Like, for instance, Al Gore got more votes. He got more votes, and Donald Trump got fewer votes than. So yeah, it's the legal argument would have been much stronger.
Right, but, like, we couldn't have pulled that off.
What do you think would have happened? What do you think would have happened? So first of all, there wouldn't have been as many guns there, so that would have been different. But what do you think would have happened had there been, when you say not pulled it off, do you mean because it wouldn't have been an armed coalition, or do you mean because the police on the scene would have treated it differently?
I mean, because the minute, this takes organization, right? Like, we know this wasn't a bunch of tours at the Capitol that became, right? Like, we know what it takes to pull that off from an organizing perspective. Right?
Yeah.
So I think the minute Black Lives Matters and, some indigenous group and some Latino group in some city started to get together and Googled how much does it cost to get buses to the Capitol.
Yeah.
It would have been stopped. Right. And I guess to see congressmen giving it's mind blowing as a person who is an organizer, you know what I mean? Who's organize things, right? In DC.
Yeah.
I mean, to get a permit, but was it the president's permit? And then it was supposed to be again, thinking about it tactically, you can't, the pull you have to pull that off.
Yeah.
And then the police don't, the DC police get out of here. Go, whatever you can say on this show.
We're gonna go to a quick break and we'll be right back. Just stick with us. 202-808-9925. We'll be back with Malia for a minute and then your phone calls. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. What does it mean to be an American today? We opened up with Langston Hughes, kind of a beautiful argument and plea and poem for what we might be, what we hope to be, even if we haven't been it. We'll be back with Malia in just a second. I'm Jeff.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them.
So Mother Jones Magazine got a hold of some leaked audio that was taken of Steve Bannon. He was talking with a group of people on October 31st, 2020. That's in the days prior to the election. Now, at this point, everybody in America who was paying serious attention knew that Trump was going to lose this election. The polls were showing this. I mean, he lost by 7 million votes. You can't bury that. You can't hide that. That's a freight train coming down the road at you. He knew he was going to lose. Bannon knew he was going to lose. And Bannon tells this crowd that Trump is going to declare victory on election night because he knows that a lot of the Democrats didn't want to show up in person at the polls because of COVID, and so they mailed in their ballots. Republicans weren't so concerned, and Trump is going to be ahead. And he's predicting exactly what's going to happen, which raises the question, how well planned was this? It really looks like there's a conspiracy. You can check it out. There's a whole video about it at thomhartmann.com. Check it out.
We're talking to Malia Lazoo. The discussion was, Malia was sharing that her latest soap opera has been the January 6th hearings, and imagine as organizers, as we both were, what it would have been like and all the logistical impossibilities of trying to pull that off, all the resistances that would have happened from the inception of the idea, from the first Google search of how could I get buses to get to the Capitol, the first Latino group, Latinx group that did that. You know, what phone call would they have received? What investigation might have ensued, even before that coalition descended upon the Capitol. But Malia, if you wanted to finish that point, feel free, and thanks for your patience with the breaks.
No problem. And just let me know and I'll be like, so yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up beautifully, right? Like, these things aren't easy to do. and to pull off like a march on Washington. Bayard Rustin and others worked themselves to exhaustion, right? To get that done. And they needed to bring in everybody, right? They needed to get approval from so many people. And, I just think about how, they were getting shirts printed that said Civil War. And again, not that, I don't think we would have needed to have a shirt that was that obvious. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I heard what you're saying. I thought about it a little bit, but I hadn't thought about all the steps leading up to it, right? As soon as you put through a Google order that said, put through a credit card order rather, that said, I would like 150 Civil War Now shirts, right? I would like a Hangman's Noose, please, right? I need nails for a Hangman's Noose.
Send the Civil War shirts to Black Lives Matter, New York. You know what I mean? It wouldn't happen.
No, it's a fair point. It's a fair point. All right, I want to go to a hard pivot before we wrap, because this is just something that came in the news. It was before happened after. Well, the news came out after I had emailed you to ask you to come on, and thanks for doing it. Did you see the story in ProPublica, New York Times, now elsewhere, about this? I think it was Chicago area industrialist Bar Seed, if I'm pronouncing that name, who just gave $1.6 billion, biggest political gift in history, biggest political advocacy gift in history, and just gave it to Leonard Leo's group that nobody'd heard of before because it's been organized as a trust, so people weren't really aware of the gift that even happened. Has this crossed your radar screen, first of all? And even if it hasn't, what do you think, as somebody who's not only been an organizer, but has worked as trying to make the banking industry a little more just, has also worked with, as you said, educating the next generation of capitalists. You've also worked with donors, raised money yourself, advised donors. As you think about the response to 1.6, I don't know the biggest check you ever asked for, but I know, because nobody has, it was never as big as $1.6 billion, at least for a political advocacy group. What do you think ought to be the response to addressing a $1.6 billion political advocacy gift?
Yeah, the same thing that, needs to be responded to, donor-driven movements are oligarch movements. And I mean that even on whatever side, right? You're on. Yeah, folks are fighting, aren't they? Damn, 1.6. I didn't see this story, so I'm now just processing it all right now. Wow. And it was a trust, so there was even they were trying to be hiding.
Yeah, and how they ended up getting the data, I don't know, but the gift had been made in a trust, and so exactly how it got disclosed, the group was, I think, Marble Freedom, which is its own interesting name. But yeah, the dude who gave it is 90 years old. So it's just, the vision in my head was like Mr. Burns saying, what's the last thing I can do to this town? And the last thing I can do is $1.6 billion to Leonard Leo. And by the way, apparently the process began 2 years ago, so this money really has been used to strategize even recent stuff on
the other thing, because no one writes a $1.6 billion check. You got a plan to write that check. You know what I mean?
It wasn't a whim. You don't pick up the National Enquirer at the checkout aisle.
Right. No, you don't call your banker and say, hey, I'm going to transfer $1.6 billion
That's a good
tomorrow.
Point. You can't just get the money in a wheelbarrow and bring it over. They don't have it, right? They have to muster the money.
Can I put it on my Amex and you just pay it off? Thanks.
Malia, before they go to break, what's something you want to plug? What's something we've got a guest coming up. What's something you want to plug before we go?
So in 2024, I have a book coming out called From Intention to Impact, a practical guide to DE&I and MIT Press. And it's going to help everyone have, understand how to bring DE&I into the business side of your business and get it out of your cost center.
Awesome. Thanks for being with us. It's awesome to hear your voice.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Thank you so much, Malia Lazoo. Hopefully we'll have a chance to have her on again when the book is out. We'll be right back. This is Thom Hartmann Show. This is your show. I'm Jeff.
This is the
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr. It's how progressives and moderates can unite to save our country. This is from the introduction, titled The Opportunity We Dare Not Miss. Will progressives and moderates feud while America burns? Or will these natural allies take advantage of a historic opportunity to strengthen American democracy and defeat an increasingly radical form of conservatism? The choice in our politics is just that stark. This book is offered in a spirit of hope, but with a sense of alarm. My hope is inspired by the broad and principled opposition that Donald Trump's presidency called forth. It is a movement that can and should be the driving force in our politics long after Trump is gone. His abuses of office, his divisiveness, his bigotry, his autocratic habits, and his utter lack of seriousness about the responsibilities of the presidency drew millions of previously disengaged citizens to the public square and the ballot box. The danger he represented inspired young Americans to participate in our public life at unprecedented levels. Tens of thousands of Americans, especially women, have gathered in libraries, diners, and church basements to share wisdom, to organize, and in many cases to run for office themselves. These newly engaged citizens have created an opportunity to build a broad alliance for practical and visionary government, as promising as anything since the Great Depression gave Franklin Roosevelt the chance to build the New Deal coalition. To seize this opening, progressives and moderates must realize that they are allies who have more in common than they sometimes wish to admit. They share a commitment to what public life can achieve and the hope that government can be decent again. They reject the appeals to racism that have been Trump's calling card and the divisiveness at the heart of his electoral strategy. Together, they long for a politics focused on freedom, fairness, and the future. This new politics would be rooted in the economic justice that has always been the left's driving goal, and in the problem-solving approach to government that moderates have long championed. It's true that these camps often battle over whether the nation should seek restoration or transformation in the years after Trump. In fact, our country needs both. To restore the democratic norms we have always valued, we must begin to heal the social and economic wounds that led to Trump's presidency in the first place. Yet there is resistance to common ground among progressives and moderates alike. They often mistrust each other's motives, battle fiercely over tactics, argue over how much change our country needs, and squabble over whether specific policy ideas go too far or not far enough. The moderate says, hey, progressive, you think that if you just lay out the boldest and most ambitious approach to any given problem, the people will rally to your side. Really? For one thing, people may like your objective, but think you're changing things way more than we have to. And we can battle to the death over, say, a Democratic Party platform plank or the first draft of a bill. But without the hard negotiating and compromising that legislative politics requires, a bold idea will remain just a platform plank. That really doesn't do anyone any good. You subject everyone to so many litmus tests that we might as well be in chemistry class. And God save us from your abuse on Twitter if we disagree with you. You lefties have no idea how to win elections outside of Berkeley or Brooklyn, and some of your ideas are so sweeping that they'll scare potential voters away. At this point, the moderate is likely to wield the sturdy old punchline, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But hold on, says the progressive. You moderates spend so much time negotiating with yourselves that you compromise away goals and priorities before the real battle even begins. Your ideas get so soggy and complicated that they mobilize no one and mostly put people to sleep. Better to have the courage of your convictions, lay out your hopes plainly and passionately, and inspire voters to join in. Besides, you middle-of-the-roaders were so petrified of Ronald Reagan and the right wing that you caved into the Gipper's economic ideas, let inequality run wild, and gave us a racist and grossly unfair criminal justice system. The extremists have pulled the political center so far right that the only way back to sanity is to show our fellow citizens what a real progressive program looks like. At the risk of sounding like a perhaps unwelcome counselor attempting to ease a family quarrel, I would plead with moderates and progressives to listen to each other carefully. If the events since 2016 do not teach moderates and progressives that they must find ways of working together, nothing will. If they fail to heed each other's advice and take each other's concerns seriously, they will surrender the political system to an increasingly undemocratic right with no interest in any of their shared goals, priorities, and commitments. Moderates are right about the complexity of getting things done in a democracy. Even when the boldest ideas have prevailed, they did so because complex coalitions were built. Important, and it should be said often legitimate, interests were accommodated, and some lesser goals were left by the wayside to be fought for another day. Moderates are also right that democracy requires persuading those who are open to change but worry about how this or that reform might work in practice or affect them personally. Think losing their private health insurance. Disdaining as sellouts, those who raise inconvenient questions or express qualms is not the way to build a majority for reform. Moderates are also right that Americans in large number are tired of politics that involves more yelling than dialogue, more demonizing than understanding. But progressives are right to say that for the last 3 decades, moderates have spent too much time negotiating with themselves. Consider all the effort Democrats put into wooing Republicans by responding to their proposals to amend Obamacare. The book Code Red by E.J. Dionne Jr.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us.
We are back, and in just a moment, we are going to have a guest. But to open up that guest, Deborah has been waiting for a long time, and I thought Deborah's question might even cue up the topic. Deborah from Cleveland, Ohio, thanks for patiently waiting. You're on the air.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Great. My question is, since there's such a concern and men don't want women to have abortions, how about the man gets a vasectomy?
I appreciate, Deborah, the call, and I think it's a fitting opening. Appreciate it so much. A fitting opening to the topic. Right now we're going to have on Layla Abulfazli, the Director of Federal Reproductive Rights at the National Women's Law Center, to talk about what's happening. It's in light of what's happened with Roe versus Wade. It's in light of what's happening in primary elections. It's in light of the $1.6 billion contribution that has just come to light. And it's in light of the trigger laws around multiple states in the union that had laws. We'll explain what those trigger laws are, a bunch you already know, and Layla can help us do that. Layla, can you hear me?
Hi, sorry, I'm having a little bit of audio, but hi, thank you for having me. I think that was to me.
Yes, it was. Thank you so much for being with us. First of all, wanted to ask about the trigger laws. Just so we level set, just so everybody's starting in the same place, explain what the trigger laws are around the country.
Yeah, there are a variety. Thank you again. Sorry that I'm having audio problems, but thank you for having me. There are a variety of laws that ban abortion at different points in the pregnancy that are taking effect. Some took effect right after the Supreme Court decision, and some are taking effect this week in Tennessee and Texas and potentially in Idaho. And it's important to note that in some places like Texas and Tennessee, there's already some form of ban in place, and the trigger bans that are going to take effect soon are even more draconian than what was already in place.
Is there an example or two that you think would, open up eyes the widest, or that would teach or motivate the most?
Can you say that one more time?
Sure. What are examples of trigger laws that are now in effect that you'd really want to highlight? Is there a state, for instance, that either sheds a lot of light or that's pretty scary?
So, I mean, in the states that have banned abortion, they're all very scary. There's reporting out of the ban is already in place in places like Mississippi, and people have to travel. And then where are they going to travel to? Right now in Tennessee, there's a 6-week ban in place, but that does mean that some abortions before then can still happen. But starting on the 25th, almost all abortions are going to be banned. And so, the total ban is pretty strict, and even for what is so-called life exception that some people talk about, it actually just provides an affirmative defense to the provider. It doesn't actually say this is expressly carved out. So you're still to the whims of the local prosecutor. And when, as you know, in pregnancy situations, things change by the seconds. And the idea that the state is interfering in people's lives this intensely, and really the decision is no longer of the healthcare provider and the patient, but the decision is of the lawyers potentially at the hospital, of the state officials, and really federal government, state government officials that have no idea what they are doing and how they're regulating and restricting people's lives. It's really scary across the country, and there are these bans, we're seeing them play out as people either have to travel across multiple states for care, or they're being denied and forced to carry pregnancy to term. I mean, this is really, we haven't seen this in many decades, and it's incredibly scary.
So the trigger laws were passed in the hopes of, in anticipation of, on spec, that Roe v. Wade would be overturned, rooting for the Federalist Society, for Leonard Leo, for Justice Gorsuch, et cetera, to turn the tide and overturn Roe v. Wade. And so now those trigger laws, now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, now they're triggered. What's the state of play in states that didn't already enact trigger laws? Are there state-by-state fights, there's state-by-state votes that are happening right now? Obviously, we know about Kansas. What else is happening out there that people should be really aware of?
Yeah, it is really state-by-state, and there are incredible advocates in those states fighting as hard as they can to keep the access. There have been fights. What happens is a state legislature will decide if there isn't a ban, or a ban that goes far enough. A state legislature can decide to ban abortion more so, or to impose a more draconian ban. And so we've seen fights in West Virginia, in Indiana, in addition to the one you said in Kansas, although Kansas was a ballot measure. And so the ones I was talking about in Indiana, West Virginia were more state legislature. They were considering bans. And you had an incredible outcry from people in those states, really rejecting that governmental interference in such a private decision. And so we can expect more of those to happen. The state legislatures will consider bans that either they don't think their ban goes far enough, or they will want to eliminate some of the exceptions that may be in there. So this is what we expect in the near to medium future, that those who the state legislators have extremist legislators on there will say, we didn't go far enough and we want to go further, now that it is absolute chaos in the legal sphere in terms of having no constitutional right to abortion. And this is really what Justice Alito really sparked and really wanted, really, after declaring the Constitution doesn't protect the right.
Yeah, the New York Times today was discussing the abortion abolitionist movement, which is even more out of the mainstream, that is making the case that that if life begins at conception and abortion is murder, then the punishment for a woman, the punishment for a doctor, should be the kind of punishment that would be suitable for murder. It should be criminal, and it should include even the death penalty. Is that, how are you seeing those discussions? I even think that discussion came up in Indiana, and so far I think it hasn't gotten full purchase with even the base of the Republican Party, but it also hasn't gone away. What's the sort of state of kind of the extreme end, or maybe the vanguard end, of the anti-abortion, so the abortion abolitionist movement?
I first just want to say I cringe a little bit about the use of the term abolition, because
Amen.
I associate that
That's
with
what they call themselves, to be clear.
That's right. I understand, and I just want to name that, to take that term that means so much in our country's history as it is to slavery, is just appalling. But I think it's important to note that before the Supreme Court declared there is no constitutional right, some women already were criminalized for their pregnancy outcomes. And that is was already happening in the criminal justice system. And so that is not something that's new. Now, it didn't happen that often, but it was happening. And so what we probably will see, no matter what, is an aggressive effort to go after the people who've been pregnant. And they may not need to do it through this aggressive effort of personhood or whatever, that they'll say, oh, the abortion bans don't criminalize the people, but they'll go after the people in different ways. The scope of criminalization, we see this in countries outside of the United States that criminalizes abortion, that the people can be criminalized when there's a stillbirth outcome, for example. And so what it more plays into, what they say is their future, is we're already living the extreme version of the anti-abortion movement. I mean, there is no federal right and there is no abortion access in many states across the U.S. That's already extreme. And this future of criminalizing patients and providers is in the now, in the sense that they've already said they want to go after providers, and they can find creative ways to go after the patients if they want. And so that is what we are really concerned about, because we know how criminalization in this country usually lands, and what that means for people who are already over-criminalized and over-policed in our country.
Your focus, well, I don't know, your title says federal. I don't know if that's where you focus most of your energy. The quick version, we got a minute before break, about 45 seconds before break. What's the current progress of addressing this federally with legislation?
So both the House and Senate have tried, the House Democrats and Senate Democrats have tried to pass a bill that would protect access across the country, provide that federal floor that we need. And the House, it passed, and the Senate got blocked by the Republicans, which is not surprising because 47 of them asked the Supreme Court to overturn Roe. So the current landscape is we don't have enough members in the Senate to support such a federal bill, even though most Americans want to protect the right to abortion.
Is there any races you're particularly watching? It sounds like then that it might be relatively close. Do the elections upcoming, what do they bear upon the issues you're working on? What is abortion on the ballot? I assume it is in districts all over the country.
Abortion is on the ballot, and I watch every election, and all of you should as well. Every single level is important, from the school board to your member in Congress.
Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much for your work. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back. This is Tom Show.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll finish with your calls, 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. Richard from Naples, you're on.
Good afternoon, Jefferson. Thank you so much for doing good work there. Tom is great, as we know, but you're doing a very good representation. Thank you.
Very good compared to great. I'll take it, man.
What I want to say is that this upcoming election, we are living in times like no other times. We have to get serious, and we have to recognize how important it is for us to act quickly on democracy, because we're about to lose our chance to complete the experiment of democracy, as we all know. And what I'm suggesting is that we put on the ballot, make it clear that if we can get more representation from Democratic senators, especially, and representatives, but especially senators, if we can get, a good majority of senators, we can do things such as change the Supreme Court, and we should. It takes, but, we can add 13, we could have 13 justices in the Supreme Court just as easily as 9, and it's illegal. And if we make that a campaign issue, if we say vote Democratic so that we can get the Supreme Court where it needs to be, we all know how the Supreme Court got to be the way it is now. It is Opus Dei, and and I was born and raised Catholic, and I'm, ashamed of that particular portion of the Catholic religion. But it has happened and is happening. So we need to make the correction, and we need to make it clear that this upcoming election is the way to do it.
Well, I appreciate the call, Richard. And I think the question of Supreme Court reform is squarely before the American people now, in a similar way as it was with Franklin Roosevelt when it looked like he was going to expand the court, looked like he had the votes to expand the court, and because of the Lochner era consistent rejection of any social welfare legislation, they just kept using an I would say, misinterpretation of the due process clause to say that you couldn't regulate health and human benefit and the environment, et cetera, that people like George Will have explicitly called for another Lochner era, for when quote Nancy McLean, where Supreme Court can put democracy in chains and in fact limit the ability of Congress, of democratically elected representatives, to protect social welfare, to protect the environment, to protect the middle class, to help support education, help support more social mobility, to keep people from polluting and exacerbating climate change, that they will chain up the ability of democracy to do its work. And that is become pretty explicit, and we've now seen it with Roe versus Wade. And just before, we know about the stitch in time that saved the nine, or the switch in time, the switched view of the one justice that changed the Supreme Court treatment to FDR policies that then kept the court at nine. It's one of the more important parts of judicial history. We are in a similar position now. Not politically. Biden doesn't have the same majorities as FDR, but we're in a similar position where the Supreme Court is going to be demonstrating for the next bunch of years how out of step it is with the needs of democracy, how out of step it is with the majority of the country. And we're going to have to look at reform. That includes, yes, the question of enlarging, and it's not packing, by the way. The court's already been packed. Federal Society packed it. But also, it's just, 12-year term limits. They can be there for a long time, but maybe not forever. Stay a justice, stay a judge, but
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We're going straight to your calls. Robert in Long Beach. I should say Long Beach, California.
Jefferson, how you doing?
Long Beach. I'm doing great, Robert.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm finally on. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but in the day and age of
almost nobody
Citizens
is.
United.
Almost nobody. I think there's exactly one smartest guy in the world, and I don't think that person would consider themselves to be such. Same as the smartest person of whatever gender pronouns they chose to use. But sorry for my interruption. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, right on. I'm just trying to make my point that in the day and age of Citizens United and the way the Supreme Court ruled, why billionaires are not considered national security threats, because we can buy, basically they can buy their own politicians now, right? That's why lobbying got basically made into a legal form of bribery.
And Robert, I'll say, if you're also allowed to buy your own private security force, if you're able to, not only by politicians, if you're able to use algorithms and social media to manipulate the public conversation, if you can hide your money, not just offshore, but through cryptocurrency, and buy things that aren't legal and buy services that aren't legal, then the extreme concentration of capital has important national security implications. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's all I'm asking is the American people to maybe call their congressmen and senators and say, hey, how is it that in the day and age of Citizens United and the rulings that the Supreme Court has, made, and, Tom goes through it all the time about how they've messed things up.
Yeah. No, I hear you, and I appreciate it, and thank you so much for the call. We're going to go speed round so we can get through, folks. Robert, you're going to ask a question. You're going to answer a question I wanted to ask from Detroit. Go ahead, Robert.
Okay. I just heard that really insulting term abolitionist, abortion abolitionist. I think we should call it Roe prohibitionist or privacy prohibitionist, because most Americans were against prohibition.
Oh, that's a better word.
That.
Yeah, and we don't. And just because they call themselves abolitionists doesn't mean we have to call them that.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Fair, Robert. Thanks a bunch. Maureen, you're up.
Yes, I'm here to complain about the fact that we have the last 3 Supreme Court appointees were made by Donald J. Trump, who the election in 2016 is highly suspect. He did not get a majority of the U.S. vote, and he really shouldn't have been able to put those last 3 people on the court like he did. And therefore, we should be packing the court. I guess that you've already discussed that already, but I wasn't listening. And anything that Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito agree on has to be bad for the rest of the country. Everything they do from now on has to be highly suspect, and the papers should be checking it over. Anything they conclude, should be highly suspect and be checked over by the newspapers, because they don't care about the rights of the people. All they want to do is apparently want to go back 50, 70 years and wipe out all liberal legislation that was concluded long before they got on the court.
Maureen, thank you so much. And the way my wife puts it is she talks about the legitimacy of the court, and that ultimately what gives courts their power is that other branches of government agree with them, that people agree with them, and are willing to say, okay, somebody's got to make this decision, and they made it. The Federalist Society has made explicitly the federal courts a political project, funded like no other court project in the history of any country in the history of the world. Leonard Leo just got $1.6 billion. He was the co-director of the Federalist Society. And the fact that they now have turned that into such a big political project means we have to use politics to figure out what the court should do and what it shouldn't do, and to figure out how we can make it a pro-democracy tool. It's critically important to have. One of the best parts of the United States has been an independent judiciary, right? But you can have lifetime appointments of federal judges and not have them cycled onto the Supreme Court all the time, right? They could sort of ride circuit. You could have circuit court judges who served as justices for a portion of their lifetime appointment. Could be a long time, right? You could also have more. There's a lot of reforms, and I'm telling you, this is going to be a bigger and bigger topic. This one's not going away because they were given lifetime appointments, and those reforms haven't happened. And that's give me a gift that keeps on giving to Leonard Leo and to Mitch McConnell and to Donald Trump, et cetera. Keep on giving. We've got just a little bit of time. Dave, you've been waiting patiently. You got about 30 seconds.
Yeah. Hey, Jefferson, I'm calling again because of the situation with their voting. I just voted. I'm a Democrat, and I just voted, of course, today here in Florida. But what I'm trying to raise a segue into what you were talking about. But I was approached 14 times via phone before the election by Republicans for me to vote by mail. And we know at the same time that they were dismantling the mail sorting equipment, and they knew that what the mail was going to be late. And they tried to use that against us. We haven't fixed that yet.
Well, I appreciate the call, Dave, and I appreciate the reminder. If you're in Florida, a really important vote happening right now. Make sure you turn in your ballot. I want to say thanks to everybody today. I want to say thanks to the staff. I will be back in the chair tomorrow morning. Thom is on the mend and keeping us informed about when he is feeling sufficiently mended. I'm so grateful and feel so privileged to be able to spend this time. I'm going to give shouts out to our callers, not only our scheduled guests, but I learned things today as I learn every time. Love Dave's line. Not just vote against our self-interest or vote for our self-interest, but vote against our good or vote for our good. Nicholas, who said, listen, we've got to be picking people. These listeners, we're not for sale at any price. They can give $1.6 billion to Leonard Leo, but y'all are priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. And wouldn't have been today's show without Charisse, who said, no lovin' until you learn to respect our oven. Thank you, Charisse. Thank you to everybody who makes this show possible. We appreciate you. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Democracy is yours.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox, no ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.